Pop Cult Pod! Broadcasting from an undisclosed location somewhere in Ireland, known as the Pop Cult Compound, where we're crazy for film, television, video games, and much, much more. I am your cult leader, Tompott, the host of the only podcast with an actual cult following, the Pop Cult Pod. Welcome back. If you are in fact back, if you're here for the first time, also welcome. But I hope you will be back. That was confusing. What am I talking about? Well, before we get into the show, let's do a bit of new business on the YouTube channel, Pop Cult Pod, as you would assume. I just put up the first of 3 recaps on the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where I went through the first phase of films, first 6 movies. I have a better camera, I have better editing software. It's probably the best video I've done so far. So be sure to check that out if, in fact, it is your cup of tea. Probably won't get the other 2 out before Endgame. In fact, I won't. But it's a good start, and when it's all said and done, you'll have a bit of a comprehensive, if not slightly comedic and rushed recap of the Marvel Universe up to this point. So there you have that. We have, of course, a jam-packed show. I need to do the 3rd phase of the Marvel Universe. I've been recapping, well, reviewing, I guess, more specifically, the last few phases of the Marvel Universe, and this week I have the 3rd phase, which is much, much bigger. So I've had to cut the news down a bit, but even the news stories I'm covering are something more cohesive. I don't think there wasn't that much news in general this week, but I want to cover some stuff in a bit more detail. So first off, we're going to do a new segment, because I love introducing segments and then completely ignoring them. And let me think, what segments have I just introduced and never done again, or rarely done? Oh, Garbage Time. That was where we talk about disgraced celebrities. That happened once. What's a segment that... what was that one? I did that in the first few weeks. Is Kevin Hart hosting the Oscars? Which I think was probably unlikely to come back. Well, maybe next year. Although I think there's actually a rumour going around they're not going to have a host for the Oscars. But anyway, in our long rotating list of features that make sparse appearances, here is a new segment called Here Comes Trouble. I think I just started our first segment that we might have to stop because of legal reasons, but that's cool, I guess. I mean, no one's listening. What are the chances the lawyer's listening, right? That's my concern. Okay, here comes trouble. So this is what we're doing with this segment. We're talking about projects that are in trouble. And the main reason I started this was because there's at least 3 of them I want to talk about this week. And I'll start with, I guess, the least severe. And that is Why the Last Man, or Why as they're calling it now. This is a graphic novel adaptation of the Brian K. Vaughan series, which is a really fantastic series you should check out. Basically about a life where all of man is killed except for one guy. Everything with a Y chromosome is killed off. And it's his journey in the apocalypse. But it's really fantastic, really interesting series. And they've been trying to make... I think they tried to make a movie for a while. What's that guy, Mac G? Did he try to make it? I think he tried to make a movie version of it. There's been talk of TV series for a long time now. But all this is to say, it looked like for a while at least up until recently, that there was going to be a TV series of it. And this week we got what could be a pretty big setback to that. So this is meant to be on FX. They were very, very high on this show when they were talking about it at, I think it was the Upfronts a couple of weeks back. Or no, that probably wasn't Upfront. It was the Television Critics Association Awards, I think. They were bigging it up and making it sound like it was their next big thing. This week, the 2 showrunners on the show left. Now, they've done a pilot for it, is my understanding. They picked it up the series. Michael Green and Ada Kroll are the 2 showrunners on this. And it sounds like they left for creative differences. Now, that's normally code for something. Maybe sometimes it is literally creative differences. I don't know what the issue could have been. But it does sound like that's exactly what happened here. Or at least that's the story they're sticking to. Kroll stated FX has decided not to move forward with the series in its current form. She thanked everyone for their hard work, and she said that they had a show that had something to say in a time when things must be said. Now, what that means, who knows? It's a very vague statement. Possibly could be something, maybe the show had a certain political spin that FX didn't want to push, or it could quite be the opposite. We don't entirely know. FX have said this is still set to come out in 2020. I think the big issue is, if this is going to have to get going soon, and presumably it is because it's got a big budget, it's a fairly high concept event series. Not event series, I guess. And if it has to try meet that deadline, they need to get working on it pretty soon, because there would probably be a deal of effects work with this as well. Most likely, at least for our main character Yarick has a monkey called Ampersand. I don't know if that would be a practical effect or what. Calling it a practical effect is a weird way of saying if they're going to use a real monkey or not. But you know what I'm saying. We don't know. We assume the cast is going to stay with this. It's got a pretty good cast. Barry Keoghan is the lead, and I think Diane Lane is involved, along with a couple of other people that are pretty big names. So whether this could affect things as a whole is questionable. Shows have lost showrunners before. They aired before, and it wasn't an issue. But to lose 2 showrunners on a show that hasn't gone beyond the pilot yet could be a bad sign. And whether or not that means the cast is going to stay with it, I don't know. I heard a rumour that FX wanted to reshoot the pilot anyway, so maybe it's not that big a deal. But we will see. And we move on to another comic book TV series. This one being Swamp Thing. Alright. So, DC Universe streaming, I believe that's what it's called, DC Universe. That's their DC streaming component. Which, let's talk about that for a sec, before we get on to Swamp Thing. That was always, in my opinion, a really odd choice to have a streaming service based around. Now, I understand the reasoning for it. There's a lot of DC properties out there. But it feels like there would be maybe a better idea to have a Warner Brothers streaming service sort of thing, and not just have DC, because I'm guessing they're hoping that the diehard comic book fans are going to pick up this DC streaming service, because it does include, comics with it as well. Digital versions of comics. And it's just that it is a bit niche. And the shows they've put out, now granted I haven't watched Titans and I haven't watched Doom Patrol yet. I've been meaning to watch them. I've heard good things about them actually, which is, a lot of people were against it. I think they're also making Young Justice, and they have a few other shows they want to try and make. But again, it's pretty niche, and they look like they're of a decent budget. And Swamp Thing was going to be the same thing. Except we got news this week that the show has been cut. Production offices have been shut down early, and it's going to be cut from 13 episodes to 10. Now, not necessarily a bad thing. James Wan, who's producer on the series, actually said that it's not cancelled, and he actually would have preferred a smaller episode count to begin with. So, again, not the end of the world, but it's a bit troubling that this sort of came out of nowhere. In fact, one of the actresses involved kind of wrote a big Instagram post of like "Save the Swamp" kind of thing, like a campaign, which doesn't really picture a glowing portrayal of what could be going on behind the scenes. The writers of this were apparently asked to just quickly come up with an ending, and what other people are saying now is that they're Warner Brothers specifically are evaluating the future of this DC streaming service. I always thought that DC streaming service was a bit of an odd choice anyway, because it first of all, a lot of the shows, like their more current shows, I think all the CW stuff isn't allowed to be up there, for one. So straight away you lose a lot of the current things. They have like Lois and Clark, which again, I don't think a lot of people are clamouring for that. The people that are could have probably bought it on DVD already. It has got a few of the movies and all that. I don't think it has a lot of the current DCEU films either. It's just an odd choice. I think there's a lot of stuff that's coming to this or meant to come to this. As I said, there's another season of Titans that's currently filming. I think Doom Patrol got renewed. I'm not entirely sure about that. Harley Quinn animated series, Young Justice, as I said. I think the new episodes of Young Justice have maybe already been out. I can't, as I said, I'm not entirely following this DC streaming service, because also is the point that I don't believe it's available outside North America. Like Titans is on Netflix over here, and it's in that with a lot of territories. So they're apparently evaluating this service now. I just think either have a streaming service for Warner Bros. If you're really intent on doing that, or just promote this content that's apparently of considerable quality and a good budget, and sell it to someone. I don't know though. I like, it doesn't look good for a show that hasn't even started yet to just be like, no, we don't want this many episodes. That suddenly, I don't know. Maybe it's an issue. Maybe the show will turn out fine. We actually got our first teaser for the show. I'm guessing that was them attempt to sort of do a bit of damage control of, don't worry, the show's still coming. So look, and here's the thing. Looks pretty cool. Swamp Thing is a very, very interesting character, and if they ever get into the kind of I guess if you want to call them philosophical elements of the character. Like, you know, when Alan Moore did his run on Swamp Thing, was outstanding. Just a really amazing character. Where if they ever get into that sort of run, it could be really great television. But it's hard to watch a teaser for something that they've just said like, hey, this might be a bit of a mess. We don't know what we're doing. It's worrying. But again, we only have about a month to find out for ourselves. It's debuting on May 31st. Again, you could have the possibility, and I don't think this is entirely likely, because these episodes are coming out weekly as far as I know. I don't think it is very likely, but they probably... Yeah, in fact, it's not likely. I was going to say they probably could hold off, maybe give it a kind of a mid-season break and then film another 3 episodes if the show was a success, but that's probably unlikely. I wonder what this means for the other shows coming out, and maybe even the future of the streaming services. There's a lot of streaming services talk lately, and not all of it is necessarily good, and I think we're going to eventually reach our breaking point. I think we're getting very close with even the streaming services that are being released. Then we come to, I guess, the biggest troublemaker in this pack, film that seems to have serious issues, and that is the Dr. Dolittle film with Robert Downey Jr. It's called The Voyage of Dr. Dolittle. So let's do a little bit of backtracking on this. It was meant to come out the 12th of April this year, so it would have come out like last week and a half ago. It got moved to the end of May, but it would have had to compete with Star Wars, so it got moved again, because originally Star Wars was coming out in summer, then it got pushed back to Christmas. Then it got moved till January 2020, and that's where it's apparently going to come out. Now, I don't know if this is an indication of quality. January is often a dumping ground for movies. Take that as what you will. What's more concerning, though, is that it is doing very extensive reshoots, because after test screenings were poor, they're doing 21 days of reshoots, which is massive for a film of this caliber. So let's get a bit into it, because that's not all that's going on with this. They brought in 2 filmmakers to try to right the ship here. And one of them is Chris McKay. He did Lego Batman movie. I think he did Moral Laurel as well under those films. So he's kind of generally an animation background, comedy background. Because this should be a kind of a comedic farce is what they're going for, I think. And Jonathan Liebesman, who directed Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Platinum Dunes Michael Bay one, who of course would have that experience with special effects. And that is apparently what they want. They want McKay to help write some new material to make it funnier, and Liebesman to essentially give advice on the special effects component of the movie, because, as you would imagine, animals would be a huge part of this, and the animals are talking. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of special effects involved in that. I just find this baffling that they made this movie anyway. Obviously, it's produced by Robert Downey Jr. I think he's probably the one pushing for it through Team Downey, his production house. But why would you greenlight a $175 million film? And that's before marketing, distribution, and I imagine reshoots are going to cost possibly more again. And give it to a writer or a director who's known for smaller character dramas. Like, they gave this to, what's his name, Jonathan Gadden, I think his name is. Like, Stephen Gaden, I think his name is. I don't have this written in front of me, I'm just trying to remember. He's probably best known for Syriana, which, if you've ever seen Syriana, is a very slow, political kind of drama with George Clooney. Aside from that, I think he's written a few other kind of, maybe like the most extensive thing he's done is probably like a crime thriller. But again, very, very different. And the fact that this is going to have such a big budget is crazy. Obviously, it needs a big budget, but they're hedging a lot of bets on this being a big deal, and I don't think people care all that much. Like, put aside the Eddie Murphy Dr. Dolittle, which, oh, actually, by the way, while looking things up on this, there's 5 of those movies. They just kept making them straight to DVD, apparently, which is insane. But anyway, that was just a side note. One of the most notorious box office bombs of all time was the Dr. Dolittle film back in the 60s. And it practically killed off the musical for a while. So you really have to question what the logic was of doing this. And they've made some very odd choices, and now it looks like it's going to cost them quite a lot of money. I don't know how much they're going to have to do to save this movie, or if it even can be saved, but it's definitely a film in trouble. which is why it was in our segment that I just started called Here Comes Trouble. How bad. Well, we were talking about the DC streaming service. Let's talk about the Disney Plus streaming service. I was going to talk about it last week, but I said I'd have a quick look, get a bit more details, wait for a bit more information to come out and gather it all together and do something a bit more comprehensive. And that's what we're going to do now. Alright, first let's talk about the particulars of the thing, the economics as it were, because who the hell doesn't love economics? It's the most exciting possible thing you could talk about with any of this stuff. Alright, launching the 12th of November in North America. So what does that mean for the other territories in the world? Well, over the first 2 years they intend to have this worldwide. Western Europe is meant to come in 2020. It looks like it's probably going to be in between April and summer from what I can gather. And I think Asia is also thrown in there. Most territories, basically, it sounds like, will have it by the end of 2020. With the final ones kind of coming the following year, as it were. A lot of the stuff, like a lot of the dates for why it hasn't launched, is apparently contingent on contracts with existing rights deals to their content expiring. So, for example, Netflix have rights to some properties. And when that deal is up, they might say, okay, we can launch now because we're going to have this back, this back, this back, this back. As far as the price, it's going to be $6.99 a month. Now that is dollars, people. Don't get it confused with euro or whatever, Australian dollars or, I don't know, Canadian dollars. I'm not sure. Whatever country you're listening to this in. What we should know, and this might tell us more than we probably need to know as far as what your price is going to be in your own country, is that this is apparently, because the price of Netflix is going to go up soon in America, this is nearly half of what a standard plan on Netflix is going to cost. I think the standard plan of Netflix is $12.99, or it's going to be soon. So $6.99 is just over half. So this is a very aggressive price, quite obviously, very competitive. It's $69.99 for a year as well, so you get a bigger reduction there. Now, I don't know what to say about that. Obviously, it's kind of a cutthroat business move to have it that cheap, and it's never going to stay that. It's going to go up as soon as the service gets bigger, more expensive, and they get more of a foothold. I think, though, I've seen people online kind of saying, oh, well, this is, Disney being a monopoly and throwing its weight around, and Netflix is no small business either, you know what I mean? So I find it odd to be in a position of saying, hey, Disney's not this big evil giant, or it's going out, it's siding with another giant with Netflix, but it is very competitive, and I think it's like Netflix isn't going to disappear because of this. Let's be honest, it's not going anywhere. At worst, you might get more competitive pricing overall. I think there probably is room for a few streaming services. Where it's really going to hurt is probably the smaller streaming service. I would say Apple right now are shaking in their boots, because they had a very underwhelming reveal of what their streaming service is going to be. And also, the price of Apple stuff is normally pretty expensive, because they generally cater to a very hardcore fan base. And of course, the problem is they didn't announce the price of their thing, which is probably worrying. They might have been just waiting to see what Disney do. But I don't know if anyone else could go that low, because that is very low for what it is. Like, even if someone hardcore says, I'm not going to support the Disney Plus streaming services, you're telling me parents aren't going to spend $7 to get their kids so much Disney and just keep them quiet for a while? Like, come on. What's even more interesting, and this is probably more interesting as well, what it means for maybe internationally, is that they said that it's suggested that at some point it's going to be possible to get a bundle with Hulu and ESPN. I think it's ESPN Plus as well, is that streaming service. So have a bundle with that would of course be a bit more feasible. They've talked a lot as well about expanding Hulu internationally since they've gained Fox's shares with it. So it seems like that's a good chance that will happen. I don't think the ESPN stuff is likely in some territories. If only because some sports rights are kind of tied up with other places. I know the UFC, I think, is now on ESPN Plus. I don't know if that would work in, say, other continents and that sort of thing. So that could be a bit less likely, but it does sound like they're expanding Hulu. And that was, of course, the content would probably be different again because of rights, and maybe they'll just hold off the same way they are now until some rights expire. It also pretty much confirmed what I was saying all along, and that was that Disney Plus is going to be family oriented. Hulu's going to be more adult and darker stuff. So Hulu are going to have an amazing library after all this is said. But let's talk about Disney Plus's library, because it's nothing to be sneezed at either. The content they've kind of announced is impressive, but it's also got a few noteworthy omissions, maybe? A few odd things. So, in the first year of its launch, Disney Plus will include 7,500 episodes of current and off-air TV shows, 25 original series, and 10 original movies and specials, 400 library movie titles, and 100 recent theatrical films. This is according to Agnes Chu, Senior VP of Content with Disney Plus. Now, again, those 7,500 episodes, presumably they go back into their library of, was it Disney Afternoon is what they called it in America? All those old animated Disney shows. Could see some of those. Here's what they have said. They said that the content library is going to include all Star Wars films, 250 hours of Nat Geo content, including the recent film Free Solo, which was very popular around the award season, hundreds of episodes of Disney Channel shows, including a new Phineas and Ferb movie and a High School Musical, the series. Which is like, actually it reminds you, what's that? Street Fighter, the movie, the game. It's a mockumentary anyway. If you're a High School Musical fan, about a group of students putting on a performance of High School Musical, and of course, drama ensues. They've also said that it's going to have the first 30 seasons of The Simpsons, which is a massive get, and I think is going to probably justify the price for any adult who's maybe thinking, what's on it for me? I'm sure that'll help if they're looking for a reason to get it, aside from just, their kids. Mind you, there's actually quite a few things that would sway people, I think. They also have all the season of Malcolm in the Middle, if you're looking for that. I think that really just shows the extent of what that Fox library is, which means they gotta get a lot of maybe, not the harder comedic shows, like something like Family Guy won't be on it, but some of the other maybe sitcom-y more television shows could end up there, I think. Possibly a chance of that, definitely. Let's look at exactly what they're getting, though. I think all of this has been confirmed as far as what is going up. I have seen a few discrepancies between what people are saying, but generally this seems to be the agreed upon content of what was revealed. Well, first of all, actually, I will say this. This is a rumour, not confirmed. Apparently the Song of the South is not going to go up in it. Now, I don't know if there is any validity to that. I think be smart, just put it up there. Put it up with a disclaimer. Because I think at this point you can almost do more damage by not putting it up. It's pretty clear that you're pretty ashamed of it, but just be honest. I think Whoopi Goldberg was really pushing for it as well. She's like a Disney legend now. And I think she was very responsible for putting out the old kind of Warner Brothers cartoons with a disclaimer, so hopefully she gets involved with that cause. If only because it would be nice to have a complete library up, There also was that same rumour was saying that they might edit Dumbo, which that would be bad. I mean, wow. If they do that, come on. I think a lot of people will be unhappy with that. But let's talk about what they're getting with that animated library. Of course, we're talking about Walt Disney Animation Studios and what will be there at launch. I think I should just probably highlight the ones that are missing, because most of it is up. I think there's like 39 films up. 39. I think they've had 58 films after Frozen 2, and 39 films are going up or something like that. What is missing? They had these anthology films early on. I think 2 of them are going up. 3 Caballeros, and it's like was that Saludos Amigos, I think, is going up. Most people probably haven't even heard of these. Make My Music, Melody Time, and The Avengers of Ichabod and Mr. Toad will not be up there. Ralph Breaks the Internet is going to Netflix first, so it won't be up for a while. The Rescuers, those 2 films won't be up, which I've never seen The Rescuers. The first one was kind of meh, but the second one, a lot of people herald that as a kind of an unseen gem, so it's a shame. But again, that's just a film I imagine they're gonna put up. I think some of these are probably just traps behind rights issues again, and they will eventually go up. The Black Cauldron, of course, one of the most notorious bombs Disney have ever made. Oliver and Company, I don't think anyone's going to miss that one. Tarzan, one of the more recent ones that's kind of surprising. Again, it might be a rights issue. Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and Treasure Planet are also not going up. Brother Bear, and Home on the Range. So a lot of the recent stuff, or stuff that isn't that, I guess, memorable. Some maybe flops even, you could say, are not going up. Which, I think I don't know if that's intentional, where they're just like covering up crappy stuff they've made. Not that all that stuff is crappy, obviously. Or maybe it's a factor where they just figured people only care about these ones. I don't know, but certainly no one's going to care about them when they add them later on, I'd say. Mind you, there are a few there that have got a bit of a following lately. Atlantis and Treasure Planet kind of stick out. I think the ending of Brother Bear is meant to be good, but I don't know. Well, of course, Disney being Disney, they have many subsidiaries, one of which is Pixar. And of Pixar's 21 films, which it'll be 21 after the release of Toy Story 4, 18 are going to be available at launch. And by the year's end, the last 3, Coco, Incredibles 2 and Toy Story 4, are going to be available. So by the end of the first year of Disney Plus, you're going to have every Pixar film, which is pretty good. The short films were actually both animation studios are set to go up as well. Obviously the Pixar shorts and the kind of Mickey Mouse shorts they used to do. All of those seem to be going up as well. One of the, I guess, disappointing aspects here that raises a lot of questions is the Marvel brand. Because, of course, they now own Marvel, but they didn't at the start. And there's some rights issues with other characters. So, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to have, I think, 23 films out by the time this launches, which includes everything up to Spider-Man, Far From Home. Okay. At launch, only 4 of the movies are going to be available. And it's a random selection as well. The selection is Iron Man 3, Captain Marvel, and Thor the Dark World. That's a weird selection. That's like... I'd love to know why it's those 4. Maybe it's just rights issues with Netflix have lapsed and maybe they re-up some of them, I don't know. But Iron Man, which is one I thought might have an issue because it was, of course, when they had a distribution deal with Paramount, isn't an issue. Thor the Dark World, I don't know why they can get the second Thor and not the first Thor. I'm not sure. Iron Man 3, again, quite an odd one. I think it probably is just that Netflix probably had demand for certain movies and they re-upped it. And of course, I think up to the films like from 2017. Actually, sorry, I think they said wasn't the last film that was going up on Netflix was Infinity War, I think, maybe? I don't know. But regardless, by the end of the first year, it's going to include 8 more. And again, this is a really random selection as well. You have Avengers Endgame is going up. Avengers Infinity War will be up. Ant-Man and the Wasp will be up. Black Panther will be there. Winter Soldier will be there. Guardians of the Galaxy, the first one, is going to be there. Iron Man 2 and Thor Ragnarok. So again, that's a really weird selection. You actually can't... I think the only trilogy or collection of films they have there that's complete, aside from the the one-off solo films that some characters have, is Iron Man, which is like probably not the best selling point. I think. Well, maybe if they had both Guardians movies up or Captain America films up would be great. So yeah, that means that they're only going to have one Captain America movie up as the middle one. They're only going to have 2 Thor movies up. They're not going to have the first one. It's just a very odd selection, and it's kind of a shame because I think a lot of people had envisioned, we can watch all the Marvel movies, we can marathon them, and that's not possible for at least 1 year. And even in 1 year, they're only going to have... and that, again, by the time a year has gone on that platform, they'll have released more Marvel movies, so presumably those ones will be up. But it does look like they're only going to have, 12 films? Yeah, 12 films up of the 23 that we know about so far by the end of the first year of the service. And that's 4 films missing from the first phase, so it's not really a great way to start. If you want to start... Say if you got to phase 1 and you could watch all of phase 2, and then it's like, phase 3, it's more recent, that'd be fine. But you're missing 4 films out of phase 1, and you're missing 2 from phase 2, 5 out of phase 3, and it raises some concerns about rights issues. For one, a film like, say, The Incredible Hulk. Now, I think Marvel have done their darndest to make that film not that pivotal to the universe. It's definitely the black sheep of the bunch, I would say. But of course, the rights to that are, I think, co-owned by Universal, and that wasn't an issue when they're putting out DVDs and collections of it. But maybe it's an issue with streaming. I don't know. More importantly, what does that mean for Spider-Man, which is still technically owned by Sony? Are Disney just going to pay a premium so they can have the rights to it? Potentially, but right now it's pretty disappointing because some people on the big Marvel fans were hoping that you could just watch all of them, and it still seems like there is no one place you can watch all these movies, which is a letdown if you're trying to do, of course, a marathon, which a lot of people were, or presumably will be even in the future if they have a big crossover film. Anyway, Star Wars didn't suffer the same fate though. The original trilogy and the prequel trilogy are going to be up. as with Rogue One and The Force Awakens. And in the first year, the last films that have been left out there, The Last Jedi, Solo, and Rise of the Skywalker, are also going to be up. For their live action films, there's not a bad selection either. Mary Poppins is going to be up. Pirates of the Caribbean, I think everyone except maybe the most recent one is going to be up. The Rocketeer will be there. I think the Dumbo is going to be up as far as live action remakes. And in the first year, a lot of the more recent ones are also going to be up, including The Lion King and Aladdin, as in the live action adaptations of that. So, not a bad selection, but I think there's still a bit of room for improvement with some of the content there. But I guess all of that is, of course, previous content or theatrical content. Maybe we should talk about some of the original content they have coming, because say something like Disney, of course, they have an extensive library, but with some, Netflix now branching into original content, and all these places, original content is also very important to get people out, because some people aren't going to pay for stuff they can see elsewhere. Or maybe they have already. I have all the Marvel movies on Blu-ray, so that wouldn't really be a selling factor for me. Same with the Star Wars movies, but some of the original content might get me, or some of the more expensive or hard to find Disney stuff would. And, of course, they're opening Disney Vault for a lot of these films. But the original content, I think, is what they're hoping is going to make people stay, because it's something you can't get anywhere else. So they have announced a few TV shows. There's nothing too exciting, I would say. Or at least not at launch. Well, there's one exception where we get to. So there's a Jeff Goldblum series called The World According to Jeff Goldblum. I love me some Jeff Goldblum, so I'm not gonna turn that away. I don't know what form it'll take. Is it going to be like a docu-travel series? Is it just going to be him? I don't know. It could be an awful show, but I love Jeff Goldblum. And life finds a way. There's my Jeff Goldblum. I don't get to use it very often. And I couldn't think of anything clever to say there, so I just said a quote from his movie, Jurassic Park. Forky asks a question, which is unrelated to the Jeff Goldblum series. It just sounds kind of familiar, or kind of similar. It's a short series based on, of course, that new character from Toy Story 4, who I guess he's going to have a lot of questions because he just got willed into existence somehow, because he got googly eyes put on him. And isn't that how we all came into this world? Googly eyed and forky. I don't know. Big launch series is obviously The Mandalorian. This is the Star Wars TV series that's going to focus on a Mandalorian, and I think Jango Fett and Boba Fett were Mandalorians, although I think that might be retcon. That's why I say I wasn't too sure. But it is something like that. He's a bounty hunter, basically. Pedro Pascal is playing the lead. It has a great cast, actually, including Werner Herzog and Giancarlo Esposito and Bill Burr. Bill Burr is in this, which is a weird one, but there you go. What do we hear about this one? They're not going to release it all at once, which I think is a smart move, because, of course, this is a very expensive show. This is going to get people in. If you put it all at once, people will watch it and then just leave after the first week or first month. So you might as well try drag it out for a little bit. I think it's 10 episodes though, so I don't know how. I mean, they might do 2 episodes at launch and maybe week to week then, so it's not going to sustain people for that long. So they definitely need to hit the ground running with this service. They showed some footage at this, actually, at Star Wars Celebration. I was going to talk about Star Wars Celebration. There really wasn't that much, to be honest. Nothing of that much interest aside from the trailer, which we talked about already. The Mandalorian trailer, it leaked online. It looks pretty great. I don't think all of it leaked online. Some of it did. It had a real kind of Western influence. It looked like kind of the spaghetti westerns, the Man with No Name trilogy, and that's a very good comparison, I think, because Star Wars took a lot of inspiration from Western films, along with a lot of other genres, of course. But I think bringing it back to that route for a character like the Mandalorian makes perfect sense. So I'm very excited for that one, I must say. I think one issue is that let's say it launches in November. I think, of course, it's going to be in Europe then in 6 months, say. I don't think anyone in Europe is going to wait around for that. They're going to torrent it online. But they have plenty more coming as well to the series. So they also said George Lucas is pretty involved with the Mandalorian series. And he's actually also been consulted or talked about Episode 9. So he seems to be back in the fold a little bit. I don't think that's too surprising. I know George Lucas was trying to make, I think, a Star Wars Underworld it was called at one point, and it sounds like there could be some kind of similar DNA between those two shows. But it should be interesting, and the footage blew people away, so very excited for that, I must say. And I'm not entirely excited for some Star Wars properties, but that's one that does have my interest. Marvel, of course, being another powerhouse for Disney, they have, I think, in the first year. So like that was the shows I named there are all available at launch. These ones in the first year, they're going to have a animated What If series, which we talked about before. First episode is going to be what if Peggy Carter got the super soldier serum. The Falcon and Winter Soldier series, very excited for that. They have great kind of chemistry. What that means for Endgame, I don't know. But anyway, Pixar are going to have a Monsters Inc. sequel series called Monsters at Work, which could be good. I wonder how it works as a series, but there you go. And also in the first year, we're going to have a 7th season of Star Wars: The Clone Wars. I don't know if they confirmed the rest of the Clone Wars is going to be up. It would be good if it was. I mean, maybe in the first year they can get it up, but that's a show with a strong cult following, if nothing else. The second year is also going to have a Loki series, which finally got confirmed. It sounds like Tom Hiddleston is going to be more involved than was reported, which is, of course, welcome. Again, what that means for Endgame. Same with the next series, which I think has a pretty awful title, but maybe it'll grow on me. So we've been hearing about a Vision and Scarlet Witch TV series for a long time. Now, here's the thing. Vision is barely called... Vision is called Vision, sorry. Scarlet Witch is never really called Scarlet Witch in the Avengers movies, I don't believe. So because of that, they're going with WandaVision, which sounds like an awful, 90s Nick TV show. Like, WandaVision with Melissa Joan Hart. It's just nothing. I just call it the Visions or something. Maybe they'll change that, because I know that people aren't very taken on. And again, this is 2 years away or something. And another Star Wars series, a prequel to Rogue One, starring Cassian Andor and K2SO. That one doesn't do as much for me, to be honest, but hey, it could work, I guess. I do think those two characters were some of the highlights of Rogue One, as much as I didn't think Rogue One was all that great. Got a little bit of confirmation as well about some of the movies. I think the movies that they've announced as being exclusive to the service are a bit uninteresting, to be honest. Hopefully they can pick that up. There's a lot of rumours of, Marvel TV series and that kind of thing. So maybe they can make, a smaller movie for a Marvel character. I don't know. I think there was a rumour of a Hawkeye series this week, but I don't think that was confirmed. When it comes to the films they've announced, at launch there's going to be a live action Lady in the Tramp movie. That's... Why? It's stupid. A documentary about the Imagineers. That one does sound interesting. The Imagineers are always very interesting, so if that's done well, that could be well worth a watch. A short film on where Bo Peep is after she was lost. A Disney family film called Magic Camp. And a Christmas film titled Noel with Anna Kendrick. They're going to be out by the end of the year. And I believe the Noel one was I can't remember if the rumour was that it wasn't great, or was it just that they decided to hold off to the Disney Plus service anyway, because it wasn't originally going to be on the service, so maybe they just figured they could dump it. Maybe Disney Plus is also going to be a dumping ground like Netflix is, who knows. In 2020 they also confirmed films, they confirmed 3 films I should say. Togo, which sounds like the most boring film I've ever read. I read the synopsis, it's I've actually just gotten rid of it from my memory. It was a historical drama. I want to say it was some guy transporting stuff 2,000 years ago. I don't know, that's not going to be interesting. It sounds pretty boring, especially if it's going to be family friendly as well. I mean, that sounds awful. Maybe I'm wrong, who knows. Stargirl and Timmy Failure, they're both based on books. Timmy Failure book series is really popular. I don't think they're going to put too much effort into making it a successful movie series, but I can imagine it being, a big deal among kids anyway. Stargirl, I think, was a YA novel, so that could bring in an audience as well. So yeah, this Disney Plus streaming service, that's our first details. I'm not entirely... the price of it is great. And the back catalogue is great. I'm not entirely sold on some of those titles. Obviously the Marvel ones are very interesting. And The Mandalorian looks great. So I think that's worth the price of admission alone. There is a bit of work to be done in there, and it does have a few issues. I think people aren't really aware of what's going up. I think there's going to be a bit of backlash when people find out they can't binge all the Marvel movies, for example. Or, hey, they of course find someone saying, hey, why is Tarzan not available? Or or something even more obscure like, The Black Cauldron is an undiscovered masterpiece. I don't know. It's not bad at the price though, I think, and of course it's early days yet. I'm very interested to see what they do with Hulu now and what that means internationally, because Hulu sounds almost even better considering the amount of content they have to put up there. But anyway, that is Disney Plus. And then we're going to come to our last news story, which is also a very, very big news story, so we're going to take some time with it. And that is the PlayStation 5, or presumably that's what it's going to be called. So we got confirmed details for the PS5 this week, and also a rumoured leak, which we'll come to in a sec. So first of all, it's not going to release this year, which is not a shock at all. It's more likely it's going to be released in 2020. Now, Sony are skipping E3 this year, so we probably won't get any details on that. But of course, they might do their own thing yet. Who knows? And they just dropped this out of nowhere. I don't know why. Maybe it was because they wanted to try to steal Xbox's spotlight before Xbox got to show anything. Or I think maybe because they were worried things were going to leak out, because stuff did leak out beforehand. So maybe they wanted to control the narrative, or they were selling out more dev kits. I don't know. Still going to require physical media. So of course that means discs. It's going to be backwards compatible, which goes against Google's plans, and maybe even Microsoft actually. I don't think Microsoft are going to get rid of physical media altogether, but they recently released an Xbox One S all digital, and they are working on their own streaming game service. So, you know, who knows? I think this will definitely be the last generation with physical media, which is kind of a shame. I kind of like having the physical product, if nothing else. But the PS5's GPU, it's going to support ray tracing. This will help with rendering and lighting. An AMD chip. It will have a new CPU, third generation of AMD's Ryzen line, containing 8 cores of new 7nm Zen 2 microarchitecture with an internal SSD. I don't need to explain that to you. You know, you understand. No, don't worry. Because most of this stuff is double Dutch to me. But so the GPU is supporting ray tracing. Ray tracing is basically a complex lighting engine. It normally focuses on, ray tracing is as in it normally focuses on like where light bounces and stuff. So it helps the realism aspect of the graphics. The AMD chip is going to include a custom unit for 3D audio, redefining sound. So in other words, be a better concept of where you are because of the sound in the game. It's going to allow for better immersion, obviously. The console, as I said, has a new CPU, third generation of AMD's Ryzen line, containing 8 cores of new 7nm Zen 2 microarchitecture. Good graphics is basically what I can gather for that. Better processing power. The internal SSD, so those are normally used for computers, and in theory, having an SSD as opposed to a hard drive, because an SSD is like it's like a hard drive, but it doesn't have moving parts, is my understanding, and I'm sure I'm entirely wrong on some of these aspects. It's going to get rid of loading screens, at least in theory. That's the idea, which certainly seems very possible. And why wouldn't you do it? Like so far into generations of game now, surely we're done with the loading screens. Come on now. It's going to support 8K graphics apparently. Now, it's supposed to support, some of them support 4K at the moment, allegedly, but a lot of people are unhappy and say that's not entirely true. So a lot of people are suspecting that even the 8K graphics aren't going to be supported. But what is interesting is that for something like 8K graphics, it's not, as far as I know, from my understanding, that's not possible with a streaming console. Just because of the amount of bandwidth and stuff it would take up, and that it would be unfeasible or too expensive. So maybe that is why they're trying to get under Microsoft and whatever Google's console ends up becoming, or any stream platforms in general. And then we get to some of the more interesting aspects, some of the aspects I can probably understand a little bit better with this leak. Now, I say with every leak, take with a grain of salt. Take this with a massive heap of salt, especially this one, because it did get at least one aspect wrong, I think. Now this came out again before the official announcement, but it did get a lot of things right. So let's have a look at it anyway, because there is some things in here that I think A, could be likely, and B, are interesting to discuss, if not else. So this is coming from someone who's apparently working on a PS5 dev kit. Just in case you don't know what a dev kit is, it's exactly what it sounds like, a development kit. They send these out to people before they release the console, also after they launch the console, just so they can make the game for that console, essentially. Now, he's said, I'm assuming it's a he. I think he implied he was a he anyway. But the gender doesn't matter, okay? He claims that the price is going to be $499. So, just as a point of reference, that would be $100 more expensive than the PS4 was at launch. But it would be the same as the price of the Xbox One at launch. Now, where that gets interesting, one of the main reasons some people are saying that Sony got such a lead in this generation of consoles, because they ended up outpacing everyone else. More specifically, they outpaced Xbox was that price because Sony was $100 cheaper. Could Microsoft, in theory, undercut them here? Because from the sounds of it, the PS5 is fairly powerful console. That SSD thing is not cheap, for one. And some of the other aspects of it would make it quite expensive to develop. So they can't go much lower, apparently. At least that's what people are speculating or saying. He also gave us some rumoured launch games. This is probably the more interesting aspect, because the technical stuff is lost on me and a lot of people. We just know, hey, it's good, it's powerful, nice. Oh, it's expensive. Oh, no, not nice at all. Basically, the rumoured launch games. Now, these are exclusives. And, okay, I'll just say this right off the bat. He says there's 2 or 3 more AAA games and 2 VR games. So, I'm glad that he said that, because this list is very underwhelming, I would say. So we have Last of Us 2 remastered. Now, Last of Us 2 hasn't even have a date yet. If this launches, say in 2020, I think he said it was either possibly April or maybe late 2020. That would presumably say Last of Us 2 is coming this year, maybe? I don't know. There was a lot of people saying as well that basically the plan was going forward that... Actually, I think this was confirmed by the person working on the PlayStation 5. He said that essentially you're going to have games that released on the PS4 and the PS5, as you did with most console cycles towards the end. I feel like the PS4 and that generation console, I think it was the 8th generation, I'm not entirely sure. I think it was a bit of a letdown overall. There was some great games, but there was a lot of an abundance of HD remasters, video game collections, especially at the start of that cycle, and it's a shame that they're doing the same thing here. I just feel like it feels really devoid of creativity and originality, and if you're going to say, hey, look how powerful our console is, saying, hey, it looks a little bit better than the last one, and the last game. I mean, you can still play the game on the old console, but it will look better on this one. It's not that impressive. I don't know. Then again, I bought the last Last of Us remaster, so I guess I can't say much. They also announced, they also rumour to have Gran Turismo 7 coming out with it, including a VR component. Seems they have a lot of VR interest for this cycle. Ghosts of Tsushima remastered, which also doesn't have a date, which is coming from Sucker Punch. So, in other words, the Sony titles that they're working on now would probably get remasters for the PS5, which isn't too shocking. A bit underwhelming. Another one they mentioned was PlayerUnknown Battleground getting a 4K remaster. It would be free to play on PS5 with PlayStation Plus. So that'd be a good thing. I don't know, PlayerUnknown Battleground has lost a little bit of steam. And I think it's... I mean, I've never played it, but I think a lot of people say it's quite buggy. So to make this a 4K remaster seems a bit... I mean, it hasn't even officially launched yet, has it? I don't know. Maybe still in early access. Then we have the non-exclusives. These ones are a little bit more interesting. Battlefield Bad Company 3. Haven't had a Bad Company game in a long time. It's got a bit of a cult following. I think that would work because I think people are a little burnt out on the Battlefield franchise at the moment. So giving us something a bit different could work. Whether or not that's true, who knows. But I think it could be a good choice. Maybe not even Bad Company, but maybe just go a different route of Battlefield for a little bit to prevent from getting stale. Harry Potter. We don't know any details about this. This leaked back in October. It did look like it was on next-gen console, so it's not too much of a surprise. We don't know who's making it. There was a rumour Rocksteady were making it, which is not true. So, who knows? Then we have the big rumour. Actually, we'll come back to that. I'll tease you a little bit. Assassin's Creed is coming. No shock to that. Horizon 2 is apparently going to release in 2021, as in Horizon Zero Dawn 2, whatever that is. The voice actors actually recently said a sequel is in the works, so that's not altogether surprising. And again, was made to be an exclusive, so it would make sense that they would put that on the next generation console to bring people over. And the big rumour I was talking about is that this person claims that GTA 6 is going to be coming sooner than you'd think. Apparently it's going to come out in the holiday season 2020. So here's what he told us about it. Again, massive heaping dose of salt. Rockstar games are often delayed anyway, so maybe it won't be true, but I don't think they're going to reveal it for a long, long time anyway. Here's what he says. There's no talk of this making it to the PS4, even though a couple of other titles have. Notably, we had GTA 5, which I think there was a year between it being on PS3 and PS4. Doesn't sound like that's going to be the case at all this time. He also heard Sony is paying big money for a month-long exclusive window. Like, a month isn't a huge gap, but I think, let's say, for example, the PlayStation launches in the holiday season, and GTA launches around that time, and presumably the Xbox will also launch around that same window. I think having a game as big as GTA on a new console for that month would sway a lot of people to buy that console first. I don't know though. That's just speculation. Otherwise, I think a month doesn't do much. Now, here's an interesting rumor. He said that he has heard, and he also cautioned that again, he's not entirely sure. He says that the rumor he heard is Miami and New York are the two big cities in this. Now, New York obviously is Liberty City. We're in Liberty City in GTA 4, and of course GTA 3. Now, I don't know about having two big cities, especially ones that are that far apart, because it would break up the gameplay, I think, if you're just like, okay, now I have to presumably get a loading screen or fly to a new area or whatever. I don't know if that works. It's not like, say, in Red Dead you had Mexico and America, and you could just cross over seamlessly to it. So I don't know how that would work, but I'm sure Rockstar could make it work. I definitely think we're going to see Miami in this game, if for no other reasons that when you look at the PS2 era games, you know, Vice City, San Andreas, and GTA 3. The only location of those we haven't gone back to since has been Vice City. I think if they were to make this one Vice City, it would be a pretty big deal. As for whether both settings could be used, it's not impossible, but there you go. That is the rumour about what we could be getting with the PS5. So I think what we should just take away from that, as much as it's interesting to speculate, we probably won't hear about any of that stuff for a long, long time. But we're getting the PlayStation 5, and it sounds like it's going to be a very powerful console. Whether or not it sounds like it's deserving of a buy, I think it's a little bit questionable, just because a lot of these consoles, obviously, they don't always have the strongest start. But also the fact that it is almost unprecedented for a console to have specs like that. And whether or not it can properly sustain that, or whether there's even a library of games that would make full use of that, is another question. But it is a very interesting thing to see. Again, it looks like by next year we're going to be in the next generation of consoles, so only one more year in this generation. And we might find out a bit more about Microsoft, because they are going to be at E3. But aside from Sony, those are the deals we have now. I'm sure we're wide away from hearing anything more extensive than that. Which brings us to our quick hits. Again, in a show that I try to cut stuff out to make it a bit shorter, we're nearly at the hour mark already, but the quick hits, we have 3 stories that we're going to bring on very quickly, and then take the piss and move on. Okay. First off, Travis Knight is set to direct Mark Wahlberg in the $6 Billion Man movie. The long-in-development film being an adaptation of the $6 Million Man. It's understood they need to change the title to $6 billion, as the $6 Million Man is just the standard cost of an operation on an American man. Mojang, the developers of Minecraft, have announced that the film version is going to be released in 2022. They also promised that the movie is going to be very different from the game, which I assume will mean that I'm able to understand its appeal. Fox have renewed Last Man Standing. This is the Tim Allen sitcom that Fox have at the moment. It got cancelled on ABC until Fox revived it last year, and now it's been renewed for an 8th season. Tim Allen was busted with over 650 grams of cocaine at an airport in the 70s, and avoided life imprisonment by ratting out other dealers. That's one of those jokes where I say something obviously not true. Whoa, it's real. And I guess he wanted to be the last man standing. I don't know about that American healthcare joke. I don't know enough about that to get political, do I? I'm definitely getting sued for this episode. I guess I'm going to get a call from the Who's lawyers. Or maybe CBS. Maybe both, who knows. Anyway. Those are our quick hits. I'm guessing it was worth facing that lawsuit for a dated joke about CSI Miami, but hopefully someone got something out of it. Something a lot of people didn't get anything out of was the new Child's Play trailer. I don't know if that's true. The Child's Play trailer that came out during the week, this gave us a bit more about what's going on. I mean, we kind of know what's going on anyway, I guess it's Child's Play. Not a lot of Chucky in this trailer still. It wasn't a bad trailer, it was definitely a bit more horrific, and we got to hear Mark Hamill's voice as Chucky very briefly. It was fine. I'm not entirely convinced of this movie. It looks fine. I think purists are a little bit against it because of the whole owner controversy, if you want to call it that, and maybe them changing Chucky a bit. I think it looks fine. I'm sure it'll do well in theatres. So I've only actually seen the first Child's Play. I might watch the rest of them coming up to the release of this movie, perhaps. But they're doubling down on the technology aspect. It looks like Chucky can control, electronics in the house and out in the real world in general. So I think that's a very good and interesting wrinkle to add to it. I know purists are a bit disappointed by that. I just think that it's a good opportunity to make things a bit different, of course. But hey, at the end of the day, it's a reboot of a horror film. you can't get too bent out of shape over it, because the genre is basically built on that at this point. And I don't think it looks like a bad trailer. I think it'll be a fun horror movie. That'll be a big crowd pleaser if nothing else. And I have another trailer this week that actually kind of surprised me in how much I liked it. It wasn't a great trailer, but it was better than what we had. It was the Dark Phoenix trailer, because it gave us a little bit about the story. I mean, we know the story, but this kind of showed the sort of cosmic side of it, I guess. And we got a lot more Jean Grey in this. Now, Sophie Turner, I think she's fine in Game of Thrones. She doesn't... I don't know if she's a great actress, though. And I didn't think she was great in the last X-Men film. I don't know if she has enough to carry this film, either. I don't want to knock her as an actress, she's fine. But I just feel like I don't know if she can carry this film by herself, and it looks like she has to really carry a lot of stuff. Now, it doesn't help also some of the dialogue. Some of the dialogue in this trailer is bad. There's like a scene where she's like, sometimes I do bad things and it feels good, or something stupid like that. Like a Lady Gaga song lyric, isn't it? Or no, Katy Perry. I kissed a girl and I liked it. Okay. I didn't like it, but it felt good. I don't know. Magneto kind of has a cool moment in the trailer where he basically just like confronts her, and then she just splits his helmet and sends him flying back. It's not a bad trailer. It's okay. It's not as bad as the other ones. Doesn't make me any more excited for the film. Really, it still just has a big sense of, okay, Grant, here it comes. I seen one thing I thought was interesting is obviously the reaction to this film in general online has been a bit, what's a nice way to put this, but basically no one cares. That's not the nice way of putting it. I've seen a few people say like, oh well, we should support this film for what the X-Men franchise gave us. And it's like, settle down there now. It gave us some good movies, but I know there wasn't a lot of superhero franchises really before it, but come on, you shouldn't just see crap, because if we'd stopped supporting the bad movies in the X-Men franchise before, we might have had a better series going forward. But I guess it doesn't matter. This is the end now, and then we'll all wait to see what happens with the future of the X-Men. But yeah, this is coming to the theaters. I don't think it's going to be good, but I think it at least looks a little bit better than it did before this trailer, at least. Another trailer I want to talk about, actually, because we don't talk about video game trailers that often, because normally it's not too often that we get a kind of big video game trailer. They kind of all get released at once or not at all. And that is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order that got shown off at Star Wars Celebration. It's an impressive looking trailer overall. It looks kind of like an action exploration game. Single player campaign too, which is nice, because EA have kind of floundered with a lot of the Star Wars titles, especially the multiplayer aspects of it. It doesn't show us the gameplay. It's just a kind of a rendered trailer, which is a little bit unfortunate actually, because I think the graphics didn't look great. So I'm hoping it'll look better, in game. Our plot synopsis is Cal Kestis, who is I think portrayed by Cameron Monaghan from Gotham, one of the last surviving members of the Jedi Order after the purge of Order 66, is now a Padawan on the run. So, in other words, this takes place in between Episode 3 and 4, because Order 66 was executed in Revenge of the Sith. It's coming out on the 15th of November. Single player, as I said, there's not going to be a multiplayer transaction apparently. There's not going to be microtransactions, EA have said. And they said it's going to play kind of easy. It's not going to be like something like Dark Souls or anything like that. We don't get anything major out of this trailer. There's some aspects that look like they could be gameplay footage, we get, or not gameplay footage, but they could be implemented into the game, like wall running and that kind of thing. Should be interesting to see a bit more of this, because I'd love a new good Star Wars game. But whether or not this is it is still up for debate. But there we have it. Final trailer I want to talk about this week is The Boys. This is a TV series that's going to Amazon. It's made by Gareth Ennis, the writer, who also gave us Preacher, which is on AMC right now. Very violent, very gory. Now, Preacher sort of got a little diluted for TV because of the fact it's on AMC, and also just because there's a lot of crazy shit in Preacher. The stuff in this is very violent as well. In fact, more so maybe than Preacher at times. It's kind of more violent for violence sake. The trailer for it, though, is pretty good. Looks like a lot of fun, actually. It's not taking itself too seriously. So, again, we don't get a lot out of this trailer. It's airing relatively soon. So I would just say watch for yourself, make up your own mind. It looks like it could be a lot of fun, and I think if you're looking for something to break up the kind of superhero, spell that we're in right now with so many of them, this might work as that. But yeah, it looks like a lot of fun. We'll see if it breaks out for Amazon when it comes out in the summer. That brings us to our box office. I wanted to leave the box office kind of slip this week so I could get 2 weeks of it done here, so I wouldn't have to talk about last week's box office when we're talking about it next week, because next week, of course, we have the release of Avengers, so I'd like to discuss that maybe in detail, because it's presumably going to be a huge weekend. So, not the most recent weekend, the weekend before that, Shazam topped the box office. Hellboy, its opening weekend, came in third, losing to Little. It's like a small body swap comedy, so Hellboy did not do good. Not too surprising. I gave that a review last week and it was very negative. I think I've softened somewhat to it. It wasn't a good movie for anything, but it wasn't it was watchable. It wasn't good. I would probably never be in a rush to watch it again, but it's fine. It's not the worst thing ever. Maybe I'm just saying that out of sympathy because of how much of a kicking it's getting. But there you go. Also rather disappointing was that last week's box office was that The Missing Link, Laika's new film, essentially bombed. It came in 9th place on its opening weekend, making 5.9 million, which is a bit sad. Laika very rarely seem to have a hit, and they put out some great stuff, so that's quite sad. But we'll get to the most recent box office and see how they fared. The top of the box office this week was The Curse of La Llorona, if I'm pronouncing that right, which is set in the Conjuring universe. So of course it was low budget and massive success. 9 million budget, 26.5 million at the box office. I should also point out that this is the worst box office for Easter weekend in 14 years. I think the last time it was this bad, you have to go back to I think when that Bernie Mac film with Ashton Kutcher. It's like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner or something? I can't remember. Or Guess Who? I don't know what it was called. I mean, you know how long ago it was, based on the fact that Bernie Mac was still alive and they were trying to make Ashton Kutcher movies there. So it was that long ago. So yeah, not a great weekend box office. Shazam dropped to second, made 17.3 million. And Breakthrough, which is rather interestingly the first the first Fox film to be put out by Disney. It's kind of a religious film. Also, I would say of note was that in 4th place this weekend, Captain Marvel. It actually climbed 2 places in the charts and went up. It earned more money this weekend than it did last weekend. So I'm assuming that is because people are getting, ready for Endgame, and they said we'll see the latest one. So that's what happened there. And films we talked about recently, Missing Link didn't have too significant a drop again. It made 26.5 million this weekend. No, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong number. It made 4.36 million, which was a 26.5% drop from the previous week, which isn't that big a drop. We have to remember when you get to the lower end, it's still not that impressive to have a small drop. Hellboy went from 3rd place to 10th. 67.8% drop. Whew. That I think is one. That might be. I have to look up the biggest drops, but that's probably up there. That is a very significant drop, and it wasn't doing well to begin with. But There we go. So just a few other notes. The global take of The Curse of La Llorona is now 56.5 million. So it's done very well considering how low the budget was. Shazam just topped 300 million worldwide. It's probably in trouble when Endgame comes out. In fact, just having a look at the box office from last weekend, could possibly even see if Captain Marvel does as well like this week as did last week, maybe Shazam could go under it. But I don't think Captain Marvel is going to do as well this weekend. Although maybe people might show up to their cinemas, see there's no showings for Endgame and see Captain Marvel. I don't know. What else do we have? Breakthrough, as I mentioned, Disney's first Fox film. It's doing really well in Brazil for some reason. like over half of its take internationally is from Brazil. I guess it's based on a book, so maybe the book was popular in Brazil, or they just like the religious aspect of it. And Captain Marvel topped 400 million domestically, which is a pretty good turnout. I think it also topped The Dark Knight this weekend in worldwide gross. So yeah, it's doing very well. It looks like it might even get to 1.1 billion. In fact, I think it is going to get to 1.1 billion, which is very good for a film that people sort of wrote off and didn't think would be the huge success that it was. To our hack headline, as we always do for the box office. So for last week, where Shazam topped the box office in its second week, lightning strikes twice as Shazam tops the box office again. Not bad. Then I have one for this weekend. I was going to say The Curse is lifted, and then I saw that written everywhere, and I was like, damn. It's so hacky, everyone already has it. So The Curse isn't broken, as Curse of La Llorona tops the box office, which is fine. It's not as good. If I'd done this earlier and gotten the headline and then other people were actually using it, that would have been just proof how accurate I am when it comes to hack headlines. Oh well. The weekly watch, not a bad week actually. Obviously the film coming out is Avengers Endgame. I don't think there's anything as noteworthy. I don't think any film is mad enough to open up against it. So yeah, that's going to be huge. I'm going to talk about it next week, obviously. Television, we have Gentleman Jack, which starts on HBO today. If you're listening to this on Monday. It's a historical drama about British industrialist Anne Lister. And here's a synopsis. In 1832, after an extended period of travel, study and social climbing, Anne Lister returns to Shibden Hall, her ancestral home in West Yorkshire. The series explores the relationships and interests Lister develops in her quest to transform her house and business interests, as well as find herself a wife. Jeez, that was really boring. nearly yawned halfway through that. Look, the reviews are positive. It's a co-production with BBC and HBO. That bores me. I have no interest. It sounds a bit dry, is all I'm saying. Maybe it might be good, but it's not for my taste anyway. Cobra Kai is also starting on YouTube Premium on the 24th, which is Wednesday. The first season got a lot of adoration. I haven't watched any of it. I'm not the biggest Karate Kid fan. I've only seen the first one. So if you're a Karate Kid fan, or if you like the first season 2 is coming up quick. I don't know how many people actually watch YouTube Premium, but people are certainly stealing it from somewhere. Video games, the big release is Mortal Kombat, which is coming out on Tuesday, so it's quite a busy week in entertainment. This is getting a lot of good reviews. I've heard people say it's the best Mortal Kombat game yet. But, and this is a big but, I've heard that there's a really stupid tower system involved. In that, to get certain equipment or moves or that kind of thing, you go through towers, and some of those towers are locked behind really pointless grinds. Like, do 50 low kicks or 100 uppercuts or whatever. That kind of thing. And some people are suggesting that means they're going to introduce a way to bypass that with money. I don't know that for sure. That's what people are worried about. I think whenever it comes to the fighting games especially, I never buy it when it comes out. Wait until the complete edition comes out and you get a much better bargain. If you can wait. But again, the reviews are good. I can't imagine it's going to be too bad. And maybe they'll patch that so it won't be as bad if there's enough backlash. So, Mortal Kombat out on Tuesday. Finally to Netflix. Nothing too major on Netflix. We have I Think You Should Leave with Tim Robinson, which is a sketch show. It's going up on Tuesday. Haven't heard anything about it, must be honest. She-Ra and the Princess of Power. Of course, the animated spin-off to He-Man is starting its second season on Friday. I think the reviews for that were quite positive. So if you enjoyed that, Season 2 is coming your way. The end of this week. Well, I've reviewed the first 2 phases of the Marvel Universe. We're a week out from Endgame, even less now. And I'm going to review the last phase, Phase 3. it's going to be long because there's a lot of movies in Phase 3. Now, just a quick disclaimer. I reviewed Black Panther as part of my Oscars special. I think that was my 7th episode. And I reviewed Captain Marvel, and I think my 10th episode, like literally a month and a bit ago. Not that long ago. So I will talk about them very briefly, but if you want more extensive thoughts or reviews, you can find them in my episode catalogue. So here we go. The final phase of Marvel movies. Phase 3 so far. After at times an inconsistent Phase 2 with possible signs of creative conflict which hurt the eventual product, Marvel refocused and expanded. Phase 3 would be their most epic yet, with the conclusion of some characters' solo efforts, the beginning of characters that would take Marvel into the future, the reunion of Spider-Man with his Marvel stablemates, and finally, Thanos would make his presence known. While many were lukewarm on the sequel to Avengers with Age of Ultron, many of these characters would quickly return in Captain America's Civil War. Ultron was accused of being overstuffed and trying to set up too much. With a film that balanced as many characters and had to set up Black Panther and bring Spider-Man into the universe, would Marvel's new phase start on the right foot? I think a lot of the characters, like to so many of them, I think that's where we should start off about Captain America Civil War. They brought in an element from the Incredible Hulk, which is pretty cool. I like that the Russos have brought in kind of some of the less pivotal films into the MCU with General Ross and Red Skull, for example. You know, they just... I've read an interview and they said basically they need a character for that, and they felt that the film was kind of forgotten. And if you want this to be part of this whole universe, I think it works that you should tie these in. And there are a few films, especially in Phase 3, where they do just slot in as a natural part of this whole universe. Having General Ross back is really good, and having that lead to the Raft is also incredibly interesting. I think William Hurt plays a character in a very different manner. He's kind of stoic and more reserved in this portrayal, and I think it really works in the context of the film overall. I think that it would be very interesting. I wonder if this was set up for a possible eventual Thunderbolts movie, but whether or not we'll ever see that, who knows. The introduction and arc of Black Panther is fantastic in this. In fact, I might actually prefer him in this film than in the solo film. He's strong and confident but misguided, and learns why vengeance is not the correct path. And it's befitting of him as someone who has lost their father, and it also suits him as a character that has to learn and develop a moral code that is appropriate and fitting of a now king of a nation. Having that character in contrast to Zemo is really great too. Speaking of Zemo as a villain, I think he's really understated. I think people really overlook him. He might be really simple and perhaps not too like his comic counterpart, but he is effective and somewhat relatable. Having a villain that is essentially tied into the Avengers' actions is really important, considering a lot of the theme of this film is the Avengers' actions having repercussions on the lives of others. Not to mention that he basically succeeds in what he sets out to do. He leaves the Avengers somewhat fractured. And that really carries on for the rest of this phase to a certain degree. Spider-Man, who's of course introduced here after being at Sony by himself for so long, is literally perfect in this film, I think. I remember so clearly his introduction. When I saw this in cinema, there was a cheer as soon as the Queens came up on the screen. It was amazing. It was one of the best things, maybe one of the best moments seeing these movies in a cinema was that reaction. Because people have been waiting so long. And finally, I guess the prodigal son had returned. We'll talk more about Holland as Spider-Man a bit later on in his own solo film, but while you possibly could go after the film for kind of hastily introducing him, or maybe even say it's crammed in there, it absolutely works in my opinion. And maybe you could even question Tony's morality of involving a child in a massive overseas conflict where he could be killed. But, minor quibbles. Spider-Man's quips are great in the film. I think he's the perfect character for the Marvel Universe when it comes to humour. That being said, some jokes in the film in general are a bit hit and miss. I think especially Ant-Man and some of his cheesiness. One thing that the film does well is that you can essentially see both sides of the argument as well. Not just saying that the morals of the debate line up, like for each character to go to which side, but you understand why Tony would be for the Accords and why Captain America would be against it for Bucky's sake, if nothing else. And then we get to the airport fight scene, which is probably pretty high on a lot of people's list for one of the best moments in the Marvel Universe. It's pure comic book goodness. People find it a little bit much, and that there isn't much when it comes to the stakes as far as the fight go. I think that's a bit of an odd complaint. Having one hero kill another would be pretty dark. And it'd be really hard to look at that character the same ever again. But I think the scene alone kind of got the Russo brothers that gig on Infinity War, because it does a fantastic job of giving fan service and not losing focus, but also showing what makes each character unique or different. And yeah, they are taking it a bit easier on it, sure, but you have to remember, considering a lot of them were kind of forced into one side or another, and it probably, and you know, not necessarily because they're devoted to that cause, they're probably not going to hurt each other, because only up to a few hours ago they would consider themselves friends. I think the brutality is there between the characters that it should be there between, though. Bucky and Black Panther have a bit of a vicious fight, and Tony and Cap, which again makes sense, and it makes up for that perceived by some lack of violence or stakes. The final fight between Bucky, Tony and Cap is outstanding and overlooked because of what precedes it. I think, you know, the airport scene is easy to look at because of how grandiose and silly it is, but I think the choreography is really great in that fight scene between Bucky, Tony and Cap at the end. It's really violent and intense, much more so than the other scenes in the movie, or any of the movies in general even. The emotion attached to it as well really works, which I think is something, you know, that is deserved. It doesn't feel undeserved when you watch this. So I can give props to the film in general. Despite being packed with characters who all share the same space, it doesn't seem sluggish or overlong. The characters are great, the new ones get enough time that they don't feel crammed in there, and each one gets a chance to shine. The fight choreography is well done and each hero is well utilised. I do have a few minor complaints, and these are very, very minor. I think the realistic tone doesn't always work. At times it becomes a bit silly how serious they're taking the whole thing, if only because of how comedic and light some of the lead up to this was, and how light the movie itself is at times. It's also really bland to look at from a visual perspective. Winter Soldier kind of pulled off some of those aspects a little bit better in my opinion. But again, minor faults in my opinion. It's still a fantastic movie. All those minor nitpicks aside, this movie works outstandingly well. Gives us new characters, fresh interactions, and moments of unrivaled joy to the audience without sacrificing story. And it happens to also tie in so many good elements from the previous movies, along with setting up new threads in a more successful way than Age of Ultron did. The cameo in the film, of course, from Stan Lee. I'll do, as I've done up to this point, we'll do the cameo and the end credits for each movie. Tony Stank. Stan delivers a package to Tony and calls him Tony Stank. You know, it's brief, it's lighthearted. If you're watching this movie expecting a Stan Lee cameo, you'd almost forget it because it comes so close to the end. And then we have the end credits, the very last post-credit scene. I find really pointless. Spider-Man has a spider signal on his suit. Doesn't really play in anywhere. I think it's just basically saying, hey, he's got fancy tech from Tony, but it is what it is, it's fine. And then, of course, the mid-credit scene, which I think is very, very good, is Bucky is brought to Wakanda for debugging, I guess, if you want to say it, or to be unbrainwashed. And it's a cool tease of Wakanda in general and what Black Panther would give us. Captain America Civil War is a really good movie. I think it's one of the instances where these team-ups work incredibly well. Probably is even better than Age of Ultron, actually. Overall. With most of their heroes dealing with the fallout of Civil War, Marvel moved forward with Phase 3 with some more experimental styles and new characters. Would it work? The task fell on Doctor Strange, one of Marvel's odder and different characters. The question was whether this slate of films would sink or swim. On a rewatch last time, I did these before Infinity War, and Doctor Strange is the only one that I actually will say put me to sleep, and I had to stop and come back to it. Now, I'm not saying that's necessarily the film's fault. Maybe I was just tired. But I don't know if I liked this film all that much. Here's what my initial impressions of it were. I thought some magic effects were impressive, but a little bit samey. The psychedelic scenes are really cool. The theme, Strange's theme, is actually very, very good, which, considering music is often not a high point of these films, it is very good. You actually hear it, like, I think, over the end credits. It sounds kind of mystical and Asian influenced, which is what this film has in spades. I feel the comparisons to Iron Man are very appropriate. You have this dickish hotshot who, through life-changing trauma, seeks to better himself and do good. He even has a goatee. Then, this is something I always thought was weird. So, in Winter Soldier, they briefly mentioned Stephen Strange as when talking about Project Insight. Why is he on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s list again? Like, I get it's just a throwaway nod, And maybe you could say that Project Insight is good enough that it can detect things that are going to happen. Like apparently they could have detected that Stephen Strange would, crash and be essentially turned into a Sorcerer Supreme over a course of 2 years. Or are they just afraid of a really good surgeon? It's a little bit silly. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but it is what it is. I also think the jokes in this film are completely out of place. That Beyonce joke in the movie is eye-rolling, I think. It's one of the worst jokes in the MCU, I think, overall. I feel like the characters in the film are pretty weak, on the whole. Doctor Strange is good, but he's not entirely interesting. I think that's also how simple his arc is. Cumberbatch is good. I think he gets better in subsequent appearances. Wong is fun. His character is simple, but he gets some laughs, and of all the characters, he probably comes out the least scathed. The love interest is no good in this movie. Rachel McAdams is really just given nothing to do. They tried to do something different by having her kind of in love with him at the start and then falling out, but it doesn't really work, because due to that it seems like the character was meant to be written out, and that bringing her back just seems a little bit unnecessary, especially because there's nothing for her to do, really, when she does come back. I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit harsh. They made the right choice not leaning into the love story too hard, but as a result it just feels even more pointless. Mads Mikkelsen is another character that's totally wasted. He shows up at the beginning and then disappears for about an hour, which is pretty much the same as the love interest, actually. That they show up at the start, then disappear for a huge chunk of the movie. He never really gets a chance to be villainous, and considering the caliber of actor that Mads is, that's a total shame. Everything gets sidelined for the origin, and while that is standard for a lot of origin stories, in this one it only goes further to highlight that those characters have nothing to do. It seems like Marvel were scared that this movie was too out there, and as a result made things a bit more bland and, not for lack of a better word, strange. If you look at a movie like, say, Guardians of the Galaxy, though, they should have embraced the weirdness and uniqueness of the character. Action scenes are a bit of a mixed bag. Some are inventive and interesting, but others amount to just shooting fireworks at each other. Doctor Strange is an interesting character because of how different he is to the rest of these sorcerers, and that offers plenty of opportunities for action scenes that don't simply rely on hand-to-hand or shooting spells at each other. When it avoids those pitfalls, it works very well. The colour palette of the movie is a bit bland too. For a film with so much possibility, it is a shame that they don't make the most of it, because for the most part the visuals are a little uninspired and the look and the cinematography of the movie are trite. It's a shame that the visuals aren't on the level of something like, say, Thor Ragnarok, which took a Jack Kirby influence, which wouldn't have gone astray here. I think that's why all the otherworldly aspects are where the film is interesting. Even the stuff in Camartage is relatively normal looking. I feel like even the lighting and set design is a bit of a letdown. Baron Mordo doesn't get much to do, but on the plus side he's just being set up for a future film, so hopefully a sequel will give him a bit more development. The Ancient One's death monologue is strong, but I think the character could have been a bit more present in the film. That there's not really much for them to do. I think overall it's just a character that feels, a bit there. Like, it would have been nice if she was even a bit more powerful, to be honest. You never really get the impression that she is this all-powerful, all-knowing person, unfortunately. The Inception scene in New York is a lot of fun, but it does start to feel a little bit of the same thing over and over again. A little bit boring because of that at times, even though it does feel quite comic booky. I think my problem with the film is that it manages to somewhat feel cheap. The effects are good but uninteresting. The mirror dimension, the multiplying look, and the out-of-body aspects lack visual flair or any sense of identity. It's nothing new. It's nothing exciting, really. I think that's why the end scene and the moment where Strange zips through the cosmos are much more exciting, if nothing more for their visual style than, giving us something different or unique. In fact, if we're speaking about the movie embracing the less physical, more cerebral and magical aspects of the character for action, then we should discuss the ending, which is refreshing, entertaining and unique. It feels suitably smaller, but it also shows how much of a badass Doctor Strange could be. I think what it boils down to for me is that this film isn't bad, but it feels like a wasted opportunity. There's a few things I think they could have done to make it a bit better. First of all, make it take place pre-2016. Even go back to 2008, and that way it feels like the magic stuff isn't so easy to pick up. And I understand that we're meant to know he worked much harder and is very intelligent, so it's easier for him. But that is not that interesting. If you gave the character a challenge and made it take a longer time, it would feel more earned. He'd feel more worthy of the title of Sorcerer Supreme for one, and it'd be nicer for our character to face challenge, as now essentially he just goes from being the best in one field to being the best in another, which isn't that exciting. Not to mention that doing that would allow more MCU connections and also explain why Strange was on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s database. I also feel like the fight with Dormammu would benefit from it evidently taking place over a long time. Imagine if Strange had fought Dormammu, for example, for centuries. It would have shown a great resilience and determination by the character, and would make him far more badass. I also feel I hope this is not the last of Dormammu, because he's such a major villain, and he's an interesting one. I hope we see a bit more of him, or we could even see him return properly and maybe even have Mads Mikkelsen portray him, because of the events of this film. In closing, there's very little to this movie as a whole, in my opinion. I think it focuses too much on the origin and as a result leaves time for very little else. It feels like a film we've seen before, and that's a shame for a character as unique as Doctor Strange. Maybe you can blame it on the characters being so different that he needed more setup, but I think the movie suffers for it. I don't think it's a bad film, I just find it quite bland, and seems like a missed opportunity for a few reasons. I think it's a film where the more I watch it, the less I like it. Thankfully, Strange would be fantastic in later incarnations, and I feel like there's enough of a foundation here to make a great sequel. Stan Lee's cameo is actually quite good. It's very subtle. He's reading Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley, which is of course about the writer going through mescaline, and because of that, all the psychedelic aspects of it would tie in well with Doctor Strange. The end credits, Thor is in the end credits. One of my favourite ones, just because of how cool it is to see these characters interact, and you can tell the tone is very different because it comes from Taika Waititi, who did Thor Ragnarok, and also Doctor Strange is wearing his gloves, which is a nice touch, even if I don't think he should always wear them because they look a bit silly. And then Baron Mordo kills a sorcerer and says there's too many sorcerers, which is set up for a sequel. Predictable, but you know, we'll see where a sequel actually goes. Actually, that's another thing as well. If you're talking about missed opportunities, if this film took place over a longer time, that connection between Mordo and Strange would have been even stronger again, which also would have been more welcome anyway. But you know, it is what it is. I don't think it's an awful film, I just don't find it that interesting compared to a lot of the Marvel films, with some starting to feel the drag of a shared universe, or so-called superhero fatigue in some cases. After all, 2016 had, aside from 2 MCU films, Batman vs Superman, Deadpool, Suicide Squad and X-Men Apocalypse, and with the release calendar only set to get more stuff with superhero films now that Marvel would release 3 films a year, it was a refreshing change of pace that the first film they released in 2017 would be something different to the usual fare, with Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. There seems to be a really weird divide on this movie. There are people who love the first more than the second and vice versa. There are people who thought this movie was a bit too indulgent and lacked the restraint of the first Guardians. I will admit, at first I liked this movie less than the first, but the more I watch it, the more I feel like I prefer this movie. I enjoyed the movie isn't just more of the same. There's enough different in this movie to make it distinct and fresh. It's a lot weirder for sure, but let's look at it in a bit more detail. So the opening credits in the scene is great. It really drags you straight back into this universe, like you haven't even left it. The film has a certain vibe to it where it simply doesn't feel like a film restricted by the Marvel universe, or even being a Disney film, I guess. There's a real darkness and sense of freedom in this movie. More swearing, gross moments, a sex bot planet, to name a few elements. It also expands this universe quite nicely, and even has a bit more depth, I would argue, than the first film. Mantis is a fantastic new addition. She's really funny and well paired with Drax. It's welcome too to not have a character that is incredibly powerful. She's a more subtle addition to the cast. She's a very sympathetic character too. Pom Klementieff is great in that role. Her eagerness and energy makes her delightful to watch. Baby Groot also manages to feel like an entirely new character without the hassle of having to introduce him again. A few people found the humour to be a bit much in this movie, that it was overdone or childish. I disagree overall. Drax was commonly pointed to as an offender about that, but in my opinion some of his best lines are in this movie, like when he says I'm extraordinarily humble, or his monologue about beautiful and ugly people. Kurt Russell gives a fantastic performance in the film. His villain is a little bit different. He's not the most menacing, but the personal connection and smaller scale of him as a bad guy makes him intriguing. The relationship between him and Star-Lord gives great insight into Peter Quill, and both actors nail it. Essentially we find out why Star-Lord hasn't returned to Earth, because he can't fathom being on his homeworld when his mother isn't there. This movie does a great job of developing our previous characters. Nearly everyone has an arc in the movie, except maybe Drax. His pairing with Mantis does allow them both to develop nicely, and that one scene where she feels the emotion he feels and is totally overcome is one of the most powerful scenes in the whole MCU. One of my favourites in any of the movies, definitely. Brief moments like that are why I find it hard to see why anyone dismisses this movie. The movie in general pairs our characters off who are somewhat similar to each other. They each seem to offer a dark reminder of what they could become if they hadn't redeemed themselves. Rocket seeing Yondu as a character who has alienated himself for his actions are a warning for him if he continues down that path. Nebula shows us what could have become of Gamora if she hadn't tried to break free of Thanos, and a reminder of abuse that she is even guilty of committing. And a reminder that running away from her past isn't the answer, but to make amends for her misdeeds and be the sister she should have been is the way forward. Star-Lord and Ego show us that Quill's human side is what gave him his humanity. Obviously. But it's a reminder that he can't lose that softer, more emotional side that he gets because he is half human. And he also shouldn't lose sight of the person who essentially gave that to him and fathered him and made him that way, which in this case was Yondu. More specifically, the film is about family, which has become a little bit of a meme with movies at this point, but in this one it's definitely true. In the case of Quill, it's realising that his real family isn't about blood, but about the bonds he's made to the Guardians and the surrogate father of Yondu. For Gamora, it's a bit more literal in that the closest thing she has to a family, Nebula, reminds her of her painful past, and she realises she has to embrace her past, accept that she wasn't always a good person, but that if she truly wants to be one moving forward, she must acknowledge that for a long time she wasn't. I think critics of this movie might dislike that so much of our movie had the team split up, but I think it works in service of fleshing out these characters. I don't think all the new characters work though. I think Taserface is a bit of a flop overall. There's not much to him aside from making jokes about his name, which are a bit weak anyway. Aisha, played by Elizabeth Debicki, is a bit bland, but they make the Sovereign like that, so I guess it's acceptable, kind of. The colour palette of the movie, the cinematography and the music is also gorgeous. Really puts the other Marvel movies on notice in those departments. I do think the last act loses focus a little. It's still good, but just not as good as the previous parts. Once the ego twist is revealed, it goes through the motion slightly to get us to the action-oriented ending, which isn't all that memorable compared to what came before it. I've also seen people argue that Ego just sort of reveals that he kills Star-Lord's mother so point-blankly, and that that's an issue. But I can kind of see both sides of that. I understand people saying it's a dumb move, but I also feel like Ego really embodies the characteristic of his namesake. The man is an immortal god, so he thought of himself as untouchable and undefeatable. I don't think he ever felt he really wanted Peter as a son. He was more than happy to use him as a battery. Of course, it is all in realising who their real family is, each other. It's a film with a strong emotional resonance as a result. The sisters finally embracing each other, and Peter realising that Yondu was the dad he wanted all along. It might be the most touching and emotional of the Marvel films as a result. Yondu having his moment of heroism, of course. A very, very strong moment in the film. It's basically his redemption, and he gets a Ravager funeral as a result, which he never thought he'd get. It's sweet and touching. It's a bit of a retcon maybe of his character, slightly. But I think it works. It's a film with so much heart and surprising depth, along with interesting and engaging visual style and humour that I can't help but love it. I'm glad we're going to get a chance to see more of James Gunn's Guardians eventually, as I think they're really unique and a bit of a standout in this universe because of how different they are. And rather than watering down that, they embrace it. Okay, let's get to the Stan Lee cameo and the credit scenes. There's a lot of credit scenes, but the Stan Lee cameo. So Stan is a watcher, which was a fan theory for a long time. This might be a little bit much. Maybe that's just my taste. I kind of prefer the more subtle cameos or the ones where it's just Stan and a quick joke. This one's a pretty big one to just make him a watcher, but I suppose it doesn't matter now. Certainly. It also slightly creates a plot hole because this takes place in 2014 and the Watcher mentions something that doesn't happen until Civil War, which is 2016. But I mean, I don't think it's that big deal. The next one I'm going to talk about made it much bigger timeline issues, which we'll get to in a sec. There's like 5 after credit scenes in this movie. Kraglin testing out Yondu's fin and arrow. That's fine, I guess. I guess he's basically going to be the new Yondu. Or not, who knows. The original Guardians with Stallone as the leader, I'm not sure if we'll get more of them. I thought it was cool to kind of get the original Guardians into the film, but I can't imagine they're going to, be a big deal going forward. Adam Warlock, I wonder if we're going to see him. I think they said he's not going to be in Guardians 3 necessarily, but I don't know. I'm not sure where some of these fit in. And again, there's going to be a big time jump between this and the next Guardians, presumably. A lot of these credit scenes set up for the future, but I don't know if we'll see them pay off, really. A lot of setup for the cosmic side of the MCU, but where this will slot in is still fairly uncertain. Groot as a moody teen, seemingly closer to the time of Infinity War, is another scene, which is, a nice little teaser. And kind of reminds Peter that he's essentially a father now to Groot to a certain degree. And, you know, it's nice that a lot of the characters in this film kind of treat baby Groot like a, you know, like their child, which is nice. The Watchers also at the last one get sick of Stan Lee rambling on and just kind of walk off, which it's pretty funny. You can totally imagine that's what it's like talking to Stan Lee at times. But there you go, Guardians 2. It's a film that some people dislike. I personally think I prefer it to the first one now. The first one, I think don't get as much out of it as seeing it now. It's still a great movie. I just love, you know, I won't say it's overdone, but it feels like I've gotten as much of it out as I can out of the first one. Whereas the second one, I still think is really unique and different, and I really enjoy it. And I think the emotional side of it is much stronger, which is an improvement. Marvel's prodigal son and arguably their best known character finally returned to the studio, Spider-Man. However, there was a certain sense of concern from some. This was now the third reboot of Spider-Man in 15 years. And starting from scratch again, only 5 years after the last reboot, had some rolling their eyes. Tom Holland had crushed a brief role in Civil War, but most of the mythos and backstory of the character removed. Hopes were high on Marvel giving us a new and different take on the webhead. That timeline mess up I mentioned briefly, that's a really major mess up. So, just to explain this a bit, we find out that we have this scene, okay? So Spider-Man is... most of these films are generally set the year they're released. So, we see a scene from just after the Avengers, which starts our film, which is 2012, and then it says 8 years later. So that would imply that Spider-Man Homecoming is in 2020, which is obviously not true. I can't believe that got through. I mean, I don't know who you blame there. Maybe you blame Sony, but I think Marvel handled a lot of it, so I don't know. I'm surprised no one pointed it out. I could see them possibly going back and changing that eventually, but I don't know. Anyway, the Civil War home video that starts the film is a really good introduction. It totally suits Spider-Man. It gives us the teenager vibe straight away, something which was absent from the other Spidey films, so that's a welcome departure. I also feel like Tony Stark and Happy are well utilised in this without stealing too much of the focus. I know some people feel like there's too much Iron Man, but I don't feel that way really. It's good to see Tony as well in the mentor role. It allows us to see another side of him. This is another MCU film that does a great job of being part of the Marvel Universe. You know, it really feels like this is just going on with all this other big Marvel stuff going on around them. Seeing cameos from Captain America or mentions of events and people in the world. You know, you see things like Bruce Banner is on the wall when they're talking about great scientists. The film reminds me of a comic book crossover where a character might just pop into another superhero title. You know, this is a Spider-Man issue with Iron Man appearing for a little bit. It just feels like it naturally fits into that world, and having it being from the perspective of a teenager gives the film a real sense of fun and adventure too, and the balance between high school and superhero stuff allows for a smaller, more personal film. I've seen people complain that this doesn't feel like other Spider-Man movies, like he's not swinging around Manhattan from skyscrapers. It's a smaller film. This is actually something I enjoy about the movie. You know, we've had 5 Spidey films before this, and they all had a sort of similar style and aesthetic. For the most part, this is refreshing considering how much that character has been rebooted, and it's Spider-Man at a younger age, so it feels more appropriate for it to be a smaller story because of that, in my opinion. And, you know, I don't think it would make great, because this is obviously like a Spider-Man early on. If he's just swinging around Manhattan, it feels like we want to miss something. We want to miss those formative years, which I think works for this character considering how much younger he is than the other incarnations of him in recent Spider-Man films. I'm glad they avoid the origin story though, as much as this in some ways is sort of like the early years of Spider-Man. They don't give us his origin. We know it by now, and it manages to allude to minor aspects. You know, it kind of alludes to the fact that Ben might be dead, and the spider that bit Peter is also dead. We get the villain. Superhero films often have an issue with balancing more than one villain, but this film does it really well by having like smaller villains like the Shocker play a minor part, while also giving the focus to Vulture, who I think is a brilliant bad guy. Something great about Spider-Man's rogue gallery is that they are smaller criminals and thugs. It provides the perfect remedy to the larger world-ending villains of a lot of the Marvel films. The Vulture, played by Michael Keaton, is a lot more relatable too. He just wants to support his family. He feels kind of justifiable compared to some of the other bad guys. Another plus is that we get plenty of time with him to flesh the character out. Keaton does a great job of turning from sweet to sinister in a heartbeat, especially in that prom scene when he's driving them, you know. And I love the visual cue as well of the light changing. In fact, something I would say about Phase 3 overall is that the villains are a lot stronger in this phase than previous ones. It feels like Marvel took that complaint to heart and sort of mixed it up and gave us better villains on the whole, at least. The film has a great balance of hero-villain interaction. They don't overdo it, and they manage to, learn their identities and interact both in and out of costume, which is fantastic. I also really enjoy the costume design in the movie. Both the Shocker and Vulture have ludicrous outfits in the comics, but they manage to be both faithful to them and different enough in the film and make the costumes look normal. I mean, the Vulture is basically walks around with like a fur collar, and it really works because they give him that sort of flight suit. It's really well done. They also give Spider-Man his wings and a suit, which is quite interesting. I like the suit in general, actually, I will say. What brings me to a complaint, though, that a lot of people have, speaking of the suit, and it's the sort of smart suit that Peter has in the film. People say it doesn't feel like Spider-Man, it feels more like Iron Man, and that it takes away from some of Peter's ingenuity. And while I do feel like there's a little bit of that, maybe a bit too much emphasis on gadget and suit CI, I think people are kind of missing the point of the film's arc to a certain degree. Part of it is Peter realising he needs to, find his own capabilities and be his own type of hero. He can't just be Iron Man Jr., essentially. Stark tells him basically this, and he chastises him, saying if you're nothing without the suit, then you shouldn't have it. And that's when he goes back to his original suit to learn who he really is. The film is about Peter learning that he needs to be his own hero and not just be reliant on the Avengers and Tony's tech. The end of the film where he rejects the Avengers suit highlights that too. Even if in Infinity War they sort of throw that out the window, but I guess it's justifiable if you're going into outer space. But anyway, on the other hand, I think the love interest is fairly weak, as it is with a couple of these Marvel movies. I just don't find it that believable. It's a bit forced, but I can forgive it because it forges that connection between Peter and the Vulture. It also gives us a break from the Mary Jane or Gwen Stacy romance, which I guess we should talk about that Mary Jane reveal in the film. Some people have an issue with it because it's sort of pointless to hide her identity, to just eventually say it's actually MJ. It's a bit unnecessary, and purists kind of complain that her name is Michelle too. I think it's a little dumb. It doesn't detract too much. I could see them kind of retconning it to a certain degree to give us a more faithful MJ in the next film. I do think Zendaya is a good choice though for the role, so I can't hate it too much. And again, I think it would have been too much to just force MJ into this and make a big deal of it and try build up Peter and Mary Jane straight away. So I don't think it's the worst choice, and definitely don't hate it as much as some people do. I guess talking about the rest of the cast, as you would expect, Robert Downey Jr. and Jon Favreau have their roles down to a T at this point. I like seeing the kind of different dynamic as well of Robert Downey Jr. hanging around with Spider-Man. It's cool. I mentioned the romantic lead of Liz. I don't think the actress is bad. It's just there's nothing too special about it. Ned is pretty funny and he's likeable as the sidekick or the guy in the chair role. Shocker is good too. He doesn't steal too much focus, but he gets a few moments where he stands out, and it's I think that suits him. He wouldn't work as a major villain for a movie, so it's nice to see him crammed in. On the other hand, I think Scorpion is totally forgettable. I mean, assuming he's going to be a future member of, like, say, the Sinister Six, as they do that, hopefully they give us a bit more of him at some point, because right now you probably wouldn't even know it was really him, to be honest. I like Donald Glover in his few scenes as well. I think it's pretty funny. I think it would be good to see him maybe return as the Prowler in a future film, but I think if you're doing that, you probably need to introduce Miles Morales, which might, not isn't out of the bounds of possibility, but I think it'll be a long way down the road. The smaller roles, played by the likes of Martin Starr and Hal Burris, are as well good for some laughs. And our new hot Aunt May, played by Marissa Tomei, is pretty good. She's likeable. She feels exactly like you would expect an aunt raising her nephew alone would be. I don't think it's like an amazing performance or anything, but it's, there's only so much you can do that role, and I think she does a good job with it. Which I suppose brings us to Tom Holland as Peter Parker. I mentioned it briefly when we talked about Civil War. In my mind, I think he's the best Spider-Man to date. Probably up there with the best comic book casting in general. The Maguire Spider-Man had a good Peter Parker, but I thought he was a bit bland when he was in the costume. Andrew Garfield had sort of the opposite, I think. And I'm not just talking about their performance, I mean sort of visually at times also. Holland nails both sides of that character, while managing to deliver on the humour and emotional beats the story has. He has a bit more physicality compared to the other actors, and more importantly, I guess, or vitally, he looks like a teenager, which I don't think the previous incarnations did, and at times they weren't meant to, but it always looked a bit laughable seeing Tobey Maguire in this suit, meant to be a young lad, and it didn't look right. Or having Andrew Garfield, us imagining that he's this nerd who's bullied when he looks like that, and he's this radical skateboarder, was kind of I mean, that's, I guess, a point about The Amazing Spider-Man anyway, and why those films don't work. But for me, this film is the highlight of the MCU. It's entertaining without feeling too lofty. It nails the hero and the villain fantastically. Slots well into the universe without having to make tenuous connections to it. The performances are good, and it could also work on its own. While it might not feel like the Spider-Man film most people know, I think it's great and I enjoy it a lot. I can't wait to see what's next for the Spider-Man movies, which is very shocking considering where we were at the Sony films not that long ago. I think it's a great movie. I really do. I think if I had to rank these, which I might at some point do, it would probably be towards the top. It's one I could easily just throw on and watch. And there's only so many of those films in this universe I could do that with, and this is definitely one of them. Speaking of the cameo and the mid-credits scene, Stan Lee shouting out the window, and he says, "How's your mother?" which I think is amazing. I love that. Like I said, I love Stan Lee cameos where he just pops in, says a joke, and that's it. That's one of them, and it's just great. I love giving him a chance as well to be this real New Yorker shouting from a window, because New York and, you know, Stan Lee and Marvel in general is a match made in heaven, really. The mid-credits scene, Vulture is in prison and he talks to Scorpion about Spider-Man and he knows his identity, and how he basically says he doesn't know it, even though we know he does. Which is, again, something I really like. They give him a bit of complexity. You know, he's got a certain moral code because he did save his life and he also saved his daughter once. So it's nice that we have a villain that has a bit more going on. The end credits with Captain America, where he just says patience, which is pretty great. I mean, I felt like such an idiot watching it in the cinema, but it's pretty funny. And yeah, great movie. One of my favourites. After giving Spider-Man the reboot treatment, another character that hadn't been working so well was Thor. With Ragnarok, Marvel sought to abandon what hadn't necessarily worked. They went in an entirely new direction. Stranger, more comedic and odd. Under the guide of Taika Waititi, Marvel swung for the fences with Thor Ragnarok. This film has a certain pulpiness to it that I just find so much fun. They obviously realised that the first two films didn't fully work, so in doing that they ditch nearly everything and ratchet up the silliness, weirdness and the humour. It's like an 80s fantasy feel to it. It feels a bit like a B-movie that you might find, you know, on a straight-to-DVD bargain bucket. In a good way, I mean. So what did the film lose? Basically we lost Earth. There's not much Earth in this film at all, which isn't much of a complaint because it's definitely been the weaker aspects in general. Of course that means the Earth sidekicks are gone. Natalie Portman, Kat Dennings, and Skarsgård are all gone. The Warriors 3 are unceremoniously killed off, which is kind of a shame. They never got to be properly used. I think like there's like one line. Volstagg gets one line, I think. He's like, "Hey, dead." What's the other guy? Fandral? He's killed. Who's now Shazam? He just got killed without saying anything. And what's it? I'm just guessing here. If I know the warrior scene is Hogan, I think. It's the other one. He kind of stands up to Hela and just gets killed pretty quickly. Sif doesn't get killed. We don't see her. I feel like they got done badly. I feel like there should be some justification, or not justification. I mean, there should be some justice for the Warriors because they never really got their moment to shine, which is a bit of a shame. But anyway, the tone of the movie is also basically they got rid of it. The previous Thor films had a certain fantasy tone to it, and this one focuses a lot more on the sci-fi elements of that character. One minor scene I love is with Doctor Strange. It's great. It doesn't steal focus from the film. I think I actually prefer him in that than the solo film, to be honest. I think what's great is that between the three appearances we've gotten of Doctor Strange so far, we see how many different ways you can play that character. He seems different in each portrayal, but not in a bad way, just in a way that shows the possibilities with him. The slight retconning of Hela and her being the sister is pretty excusable in my opinion because of how long a life the Asgardians have, and it's easy to believe Odin had a violent past, which we were not privy to. Simple explanation that Odin kept her at bay but is now too weak to do so works also. Which brings us to our new characters. Our villain Hela, which, you know, is fun. She's a very deep character, but Cate Blanchett is clearly having a blast with the role. And she definitely brings some physical menace in her role, even if she doesn't have much to do. I like her design and the look of her as well. She's not the worst, you know. They at least give her a bit of time to show how tough and formidable an opponent she is physically. But again, pretty one note, but enjoyable, I think, overall. Scourge is great. I love his little minor arc. Karl Urban does a great job with the role, and he's different enough from the standard Thor characters to be interesting. Valkyrie, Very welcome addition here. She's a fantastic warrior and gets some real moments of development. Her backstory is touching, and it lets Tessa Thompson show more emotion, as well as some physicality. Sakaar is where we get some of our more interesting new characters. We of course have Korg and Meek. Meek, of course, doesn't have a lot to do. He's got a cool design, but Korg is kind of the show stealer. He gets a lot of good comedic relief moments and a few good lines, piss off Ghost, or when he's on the Thor with the hammer, which is fantastic. One of my favourites though has to be the Grandmaster, brought to life by Jeff Goldblum. He's charismatic and energetic in the role, and every scene he's in is just a joy to watch. His delivery is so unique and weird and funny, like you'd only expect from Jeff Goldblum, but it's amazing. Any time he delivers something, it has me in stitches. It's amazing. Perfect casting for that role. The returning cast members are great as well. It feels like they had a bit more chance to experiment and mess around in this movie than they did in previous ones. Chris Hemsworth gets a chance to flex his comedic muscles, but he gets to showcase Thor's power, and it really expands on his character a lot, I think. Loki, while he doesn't get as much to do, we see some complexity in him, and it's nice that he's not an out-and-out villain this time. It changes the dynamic a bit and makes things interesting, He gets a few action beats too, which are pretty good, and even some emotional scenes to balance that. Seeing the brothers try to understand their relationship provides a lot of great character development and insight, like it did in the last Thor film. It might also be the closest we get to a Hulk film, in that it draws a lot from Planet Hulk. We get a lot of smashing and even talking Hulk, and even though it's often played for laughs, there is plenty of non-human moments with the Hulk too. Having Bruce Banner totally out of his comfort zone is pretty entertaining. Sakaar in general, is just the highlight of the movie. The costume and production design is gorgeous. The Jack Kirby influence is evident, and the colour and design of everything is just thrilling. It's amazing to watch. Cinematography and lighting, it doesn't need to even be that flashy because of just how great the costumes and sets are. The fight scenes are vibrant. They make good use of their abilities of each character. It's not just a case of a punch-up brawl. The humour in the film is one of the best. While a lot of the Marvel movies have jokes that, feel a bit too much, this movie sort of just acts like a comedy. In general, it feels like a lot of improv, but it works very well. Chemistry between the cast is great, especially with Valkyrie and Thor, and pretty much makes me excited to see them both in Men in Black International as well. Thor's arc of realising his full potential and, in essence, being a worthy king and leader, if not actually taking up the throne, but, having the mantle of protecting and saving Asgard. It's a bit more implicit, but it really works that way. Fight scenes for Thor are at the best in this film. It feels like this is Thor without any restraints, utilising his lightning powers without the hammer. This movie just had so many great scenes and moments that it is so immensely rewatchable. The gladiator fight between Hulk and Thor, the Grandmaster's introduction, Surtur the fire demon, the immigrant song in Asgard, in fact the whole Asgard scene at the end, to name a few. When it comes to Marvel films, there's a few complaints people have, that they are formulaic, bland or unoriginal. This film I think bucks a lot of those complaints. The humour hits more than it misses. The new characters are all great and would be happy to see more of a lot of them. The film is also just fun without feeling too light, which really works in its favour. Let's address some more specific complaints people have though about this film in particular. Some dislike that the film is a bit too jokey for a film called Ragnarok, that it's not, epic enough. I don't find that to be a problem. There's a lot of epic in this film, it just doesn't take itself too seriously. People have then used that point to say that there's no real consequences to the movie, which I think is also untrue really. Thor loses an eye. His hammer and his home, it sets him on a real dark path coming into Infinity War. Others might not like the big change in tone, and I can understand that as much as I don't have an issue with it. I've heard people say that it seems like they just went for a Guardians tone with Thor, and while that is an easy label, I don't think it's entirely true. While it might be a zany space sci-fi comedy, I think the styles and comedy are very different. It very much feels like a Taika Waititi film, the same way Guardians feels like a James Gunn film. Ragnarok is a movie that feels almost distinct from a lot of the Marvel movies. It has a whole wonderful style and a sense of humour that is very much its own without feeling out of place. The new characters are among the best side characters in the MCU. The action is epic when it needs to be, and it gives us new takes on characters we already know to make them feel fresh, which was necessary for a few of them in particular. It's one of the Marvel movies I could watch independent of an MCU marathon. Stan Lee cameo. I think it's great because he just comes off as completely deranged when he's cutting Thor's hair. Just having him kind of laugh manically is a lot of fun. And then Thor calls him a creepy old man later on, which is also great. The credit scenes. The ship is confronted by Thanos, which of course leads us into Infinity War. Good setup. Nothing groundbreaking, but it gets us to where we need to be. And then we have the very end credit scene where the Grandmaster faces revolutionary scenes. I'll always take more Jeff Goldblum. And then he just says, yay us. It's a tie. Is I'm perfectly fine with that. I enjoy it a lot. After a successful 2017, 2018 would begin with the first film to be headlined by a person of colour for Marvel, in a movie that would be one of their most successful films ever, Black Panther. Now look, I've reviewed this when I was talking about the Oscar ones, because this was actually nominated for Best Picture. So I'll say some of the things I've said before, I'll add a few more things. Probably might have given more cohesive thoughts then, but we'll do a quick run through of Black Panther anyway. I feel like the accolades the film got are a bit crazy. You know, it's the first superhero film obviously being nominated for Best Picture. The best film ever on Rotten Tomatoes, I believe, which, you know, it's fine. It's fine. I like the film. I get the love for it. I understand some of the hate for it. And I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. I see both sides of it. I understand for like people in America who have such a recent racial history, they see the importance of this film, especially for minorities in America. The representation in something that both embodies the struggle for equality and embraces their past and cultural identity is amazing. Especially to see it done in a comic book film and for it to be massively successful. I mean, it's inspiring for one, and you can't take away the importance of that for that audience and for minorities all around the world. On the other hand, from a non-American perspective, I get a bit less out of it because of that. It doesn't take away from the film, but just takes away a bit from my enjoyment of it. A tiny bit. I like it overall. I mean, the performances are really strong. Chadwick Boseman is great. I feel he would have benefited from a few more emotional scenes. I liked it, for example, when those scenes he had that were a bit more emotional in Civil War, I feel like that would have worked. Denai Guerrera and Lupita Nyong'o are fantastic as members of Dora Milaje. I feel like the love side plot doesn't work, but it doesn't really focus on it that much, so it's not much of a concern. It doesn't feel forced, it's just sort of in the background. Claw is good in a side role. I don't think we ever would have got much focus on him, but I think he's one of those characters that works in a small minor role. Same way I was talking about Shocker in Spider-Man Homecoming. I think he works in that sort of role. Martin Freeman is good, you know, nothing like outstanding or anything. But it's nice to have a smaller character appear from another Marvel film. I like when they do that. Then we come to the absolute scene stealer of this movie, and that is Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger, who is an amazing villain. He's intimidating on screen. He gives a great performance. One of the best signs, if you're ever looking at villains in a film, what makes a good villain is someone you can understand their worldview and why they are the way they are, and really not disagree with them. And he has that. In fact, basically, he's right about Wakanda, and towards the end of the film, they become more open, which is something he'd wanted. And he wanted to help people in the African American community, for one. Not to mention, he was wronged. He absolutely was. He's a very justifiable villain. Having that personal, emotional connection to Black Panther and his father as well as just raises the stakes even higher. I would take some points away if I had to, because I feel like when he gets the power, he doesn't really do much. But that's only a minor quibble. His final line is fantastic as well. Why don't you just, to paraphrase, when he says, throw me in the ocean like my ancestors who prefer death to chains. It's a really powerful line and has such an impact. And he really leaves his mark as a villain. He's one of the best Marvel villains. Without a doubt, in my opinion. The score is pretty good overall. The fusion of African music with the normal score. Sometimes it works. Other times it doesn't. Overall, though, I think it works. The Kendrick Lamar album, the soundtrack, is a good step up as well from the standard Marvel films. So I think, in general, the music for this film is a lot stronger than most of them. The costume and the production design, I mean, that speaks for itself. It's stylized and it suits the tone and aesthetic of the movie. It's not over the top or distracting, and it really works. I think you could almost hang a hat for the marketing of this movie on how amazing it looks. Especially the costume and production design. It blends that Afrofuturism style that we keep talking about. The action, for the most part, is pretty good. The fight scenes especially, I like especially when they're not actually dressed as superheroes, when they're doing the kind of trial by combat sort of scenes. They have a real sense of viciousness to them. And they look great, they're really well choreographed. I do feel like the chase scene, the final battle, are a little bit uninteresting, on the other hand. The flaws it has are a little bit more noticeable in my opinion, though. Everyone has obviously pointed to the effects in the last act. I don't think that's that major an issue. I think you can have a good film with bad effects and all that, but I'd say the last act in general is where the film falls apart for me. Briefly killing off T'Challa is just pointless. All it does is add to the running time. There's no real need for it. It doesn't make our villain seem any more interesting because we know he's going to come back. So I just think it's a little bit pointless. The big CGI action fight at the end is really forced, and it sticks out especially in this movie. And it doesn't look great, but what have you. The film is just really long as well, in my opinion. It feels it. The way the vibranium as well in this film just kind of do whatever the plot needed to. It just seems a little lazy as far as writing goes. I understand that, it's the most amazing metal ever, but you should have some limitations or rules for that. It's sort of like Magic and Harry Potter, where it can just do whatever it needs to do for the sake of the plot. That's kind of frustrating, I think. I think Black Panther is a little bit overpowered too. He comes across as powerful enough, and then you give him a suit that literally absorbs any damage he takes and weaponizes it. Like, that's a bit much. I think Wakandan tech in general, it goes a bit far too times, the behind is a bit too much. And I know they're a futuristic advanced society, but for example, like those shield capes things, like at the end, that looks awful. And it makes it hard to suspend your disbelief for some aspect. But look, overall I recognise the film's significance, especially to people of colour, and I think the representation the film gives for them can't be overstated. I think it's important. Purely speaking on the qualities of the film, though, I find it a little bit lacking. It's a good movie, but the amount of acclaim it's got is a bit absurd. It's not to, overlook the positive aspects, though, because there are a lot. The performances are fantastic. The ensemble is maybe the strongest of many Marvel movies. The soundtrack is good. Characters are interesting, and some of the action is engaging. Still, I just find the film to be a bit long, and the last act is a little bit of a mess. It's not a bad movie. It's a good movie, but it has a unique perspective and tone that makes it a very worthy addition to the MCU. Our Stan Lee cameo, he steals T'Challa's chips, which is pretty good. I like, maybe it's just me, I like when they take sweet little old man Stan Lee and turn him into a bit of a crook or a bit of a creep. It's just, I find that entertaining. Maybe I'm a simple man, I don't know. The credits, Wakanda sort of opens its borders to help the world, and I think that's going to be very interesting to see how it works going forward, this universe. Whether they'll address that much. But that's going to, that should factor in a bit, right? I don't know. And then we have the re-emergence of Bucky, who is now referred to very briefly as the White Wolf. That didn't really stick, but that's exactly what they call him, and it's good. It's nice to see him kind of, again, it's set up for Infinity War, but it works. It's nothing too major. It's just like, okay, there he is there, so we know that piece is on the chessboard now, as it were. After Black Panther, it seemed Marvel were unstoppable, and with all the groundwork laid, they were set to release the culmination of 10 years of films. Or so we thought. With Avengers Infinity War and this many characters and storylines, this movie seemed totally impossible to get right. And yet somehow the film isn't a mess. Where having this many characters and tone doesn't fall flat in its face. I mean, it's impressive. The film is just absolutely relentless. It doesn't ever stop coming at you, but it doesn't suffer for it. It doesn't really let up, though. I think one of the reasons it succeeds is having the team split up, and as much as it might be disappointing to not have that moment when everyone is united and fighting, it might be a little too much to do that, especially with how much the film has going on already. One concern with our villain was that Thanos was being built up for a long time, and yet he had done so little to be seen as worthy of that much build-up, especially to a casual audience. The fact they managed to make Thanos feel like such a threat is outstanding. Having him, in the first 10 minutes beat up the Hulk and viciously strangle Loki immediately established him as the monster he is. Considering how long he's been built up, it's shocking that they managed to deliver on this character as a villain. They made the best choice possible in essentially making this Thanos' movie. It gives him necessary development that needs to happen to make him formidable. The fact that they give him moments of weakness as well, like crying as he has to kill Gamora, just cements him as a great villain. On the other hand, I do feel the Black Order is a little bit forgettable, but they're well served overall. It adds, more of a threat than say a mindless army would. I mean, even though there is a mindless army in this, but I found them interesting by how savage and violent and feral they were. Thanos needed henchmen, and that's what they are, and I do enjoy how they're all different at least, and they get some good action scenes, and the fact we managed to get proper character development and moments in this film is a real testament to how well this film is balanced. Thor realising all he's lost, or Star-Lord and Gamora agreeing that he must kill her. Even though some characters get the short end of the stick, every character in this movie gets a moment to shine, which is impressive to say the least considering how many characters are in there. Personally, I've seen this film numerous times now, and it's a testament to that fact that it doesn't bore me. As a culmination of so many storylines and plot threads, it couldn't be much more successful. Let's talk about the ending, because I think, like most people have talked about this film to death now, there's only so much I can say. It's fantastic. The action is great, the characters are great, The tone works, even though there's moments of, big emotional moments or drama and humour and silliness. It somehow works when it shouldn't, as I said. Of course, I think we should talk about the ending, which is obviously the snap. And anyone who knows anything about the Infinity Gauntlet knows about the snap. And despite all of this, the idea of actually bringing it to the screen seemed kind of unlikely. It would just be such a ballsy move. And the question of how you make that cinematic was a thing as well. And if you just kill all these characters and then bring them all back straight away, could that work? Because the Infinity Gauntlet storyline actually starts with the snap. And of course, there was so much build up for him to get the gems that how do you make that work? But anyone who says, Marvel don't make risky choices should probably eat their words for that ending, The emotions of the ending still lands despite us knowing these characters will be back in some form, especially, the death of Spider-Man. Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland play that scene so well that you still get a bit choked up even though you know it's coming. Also, poor Wanda. Wanda has the worst life ever. She kills her lover, then watches him get killed, and then she dies. That is horrible. She gets it the worst, easily. Anyway, having Thanos win was just a great choice, as people now are just foaming at the mouth for some resolution to the story. With people expecting some closure with this film, delaying it until Endgame has made the stakes and the emotions attached to it reach a fever pitch. The film has been poured over and praised time and time again, and rightfully so. In my opinion, Infinity War is one of the best blockbuster films in recent memory. It not only manages to defy the issues it could have faced, but also delivers on being a culmination of 10 years of storytelling, while setting up an exciting conclusion with more emotional stakes. Okay. Stan Lee is the bus driver. He's pretty good, you've never seen a spaceship before. Pretty entertaining. Crazy old Stan Lee. Again, I'm a sucker for those. Credits: Nick Fury, Page as Captain Marvel, and the people around him turn to dust. A setup for the future, which works as well. Because, of course, there's only so much you can do with the end credits Infinity War, because you don't want to just say, hey, guess what, it'll be okay, because here's how they're going to get out of it. So it's nice that they have set up for a different film instead. And obviously, Captain Marvel is going to be pretty pivotal in Endgame, we'd imagine. If there is a drawback to having such a massive cliffhanger, it's that people tend to be less interested in supplemental movies. Or at least they can come off as a bit slight. While the first Ant-Man worked as a smaller palate cleanser from an overstuffed Avengers film, the success of Infinity War made Ant-Man and the Wasp seem a bit out of place. Last time, the film had been influenced by Edgar Wright, and this time, all eyes locked to Peyton Reed to see what he brought to the table by himself. Okay, Ant-Man and the Wasp isn't a bad movie, but it's definitely not mandatory viewing. There's just not much to say. It's not to say the movie isn't fun. It just feels like we've kind of seen it before. It doesn't bring much new to the table. In fact, this is the one movie, aside from Captain Marvel, because I only saw that back in whenever it was released in theatres, that I didn't rewatch, as I'd seen it in January. I think if it was a better movie, that wouldn't bother me, and I'd probably have rewatched it. It has a few interesting sequences, but overall, it feels like the use of his powers isn't anything we haven't seen before. I do like the chemistry between our three leads though, and Wasp is a really good addition. I think she'll work well in future films. One thing I will say is that I really enjoy the villain. Ghost is interesting and relatable. Not only that, but her backstory is executed very simply, and we get a degree of sympathy for her. I wouldn't be opposed to seeing her pop up again in another movie. She seems like an appropriate level of villain to be in an Ant-Man movie too. I feel she's actually one of the stronger parts of the film, and her relationship with Lawrence Fishburne is very good. I think another issue that this film faced is that there is not a lot going on in it. And yeah, it's an Ant-Man film, but it would be nice if there was a bit more to it. I just feel like there's not a lot to latch onto in this film. Not a lot happens, or there's not a lot to get invested in. I do like the last act. The film comes alive a bit more then. It's a bit more interesting. Use of the powers is well executed in that part, and some well thought out sequences. One problem with the movie, I think, is that the trailer gave away all the interesting elements of this. Him, getting giant objects and turning huge. It's a pretty common complaint. I just think it's more an indication of how little there is in this film to get excited about. It's serviceable, but just pretty minor. The ex-cons have a few laughs, but I also feel like they made them a little bit too silly in this, to the point that they're not very believable as characters. I think they were a bit more believable in the last film. Walton Goggins, I had to re-record that because I called him Walton Goggles. Walton Goggins is a little bit wasted. I think it should have been an opportunity to maybe bring Sam Rockwell back, actually, because he was also an arm sealer, and it would have served as a good return for the character. But Walter Goggins is a good actor, so I can't complain too much. It just would have been nice if he had something a bit more meaty to get into. Again, it has some fun sequences, but it's not an outstanding. What worked in the first film worked in this one. And while I enjoy the villain, I can't help but wish there was a bit more to this movie, as it feels a bit unnecessary right now. Anyone that was hoping for some Infinity War connections was also said to be pretty disappointed. Stan Lee cameo, again, we see that Stan presumably was taking a load of drugs in the 60s, because when a car shrinks he says, "Oh, the 60s was fun, but I'm paying for it now." It's pretty great. It's a pretty great cameo. It's also the last cameo he would have seen when he was alive. So, it's kind of sad. But it's an enjoyable one. I love this side of Stan Lee where he's a little bit sleazy, I think that's a bit funny. And, it's a good sequence overall. And it probably even ties into the one he's reading Doors of Perception, maybe? I don't know. The credits, the after credit scene, or the mid credit scene, I guess. And this could be fairly important. This is the closest thing we get to, well, it does tie into Infinity War, I guess. Scott goes to the quantum realm, and the three others are turned to dust while he is in there, leaving him trapped in there. So there's a hint that this could also factor into Endgame, because Jeanette Van Dyne mentions the time vortex. Possibly if there was time travel in that movie, that could be how it's introduced. We don't entirely know. We'll see. And then, of course, we get the end credit scene, which is Nam playing the drums. Which I don't think is going to factor into Endgame that much, but who knows. With Ant-Man and the Wasp, Marvel had finally built a female hero in its title. But with their next film, they sought to introduce their first solo female film. Okay, Captain Marvel. This is going to be very brief. I reviewed this like a month ago. I think it was like episode 10. My thoughts haven't really changed and it hasn't been that long. So go back if you want to hear a more detailed thoughts or review. I even have a review on YouTube if you want to hear that. I think it's a good introduction to the character. I like how it ties into the universe. I think Brie Larson is good, but will get better in the role. I like how they handle the Skrulls, and I'm excited to see where a sequel goes. Obviously, this film has been a massive success, so it's great to see that Marvel has a stable foundation of new heroes for future installments in the MCU. When you look at someone like Black Panther, or Captain Marvel, or Doctor Strange, I think those are going to be very pivotal characters going forward. Our cameo, Stan Lee is on a bus. Captain Marvel kind of tears the paper down, check if it's a Skrull, and he's kind of smiling, and she takes a moment to smile back at him. So it's sweet, I think it's appropriate because Stan Lee had passed, not too long ago. It was the first film since he's passed. I hope not every Stan Lee cameo is going to be like that, but it was a sweet moment, definitely. The credits, which I actually, as of this recording, Marvel just put up online, in case anyone hadn't seen Captain Marvel. Carol arrives at Avengers HQ. So, Infinity War, Nick Fury sent out a beeper, and it messaged Captain Marvel. At the end of this credit scene, the beeper is set up in Avengers headquarters, and they turn around, and Captain Marvel is there, and she says, "Where's Fury?" So of course that's going to be pretty important, presumably. In fact, it might even be in Avengers Endgame. And then at the very end, Goose coughs up the cosmic cube. So there it is. The Marvel Cinematic Universe has become the most successful film franchise in history, and not without reason. The level of overlap and sense of a shared cinematic universe has been implemented to an unprecedented amount here, especially when it comes to its extent and its success. I personally feel like even though some of the Marvel films may be a bit lesser than others, I don't think there's a bad one there. And as long as they keep producing good serialised content, then I hope it continues to succeed. Next week we have possibly some insight into what the future for the MCU holds, as I review Endgame. So, come back next week, and I'll be talking everything Endgame. Keep an eye on the YouTube channel as well, Pop Called Pod. I'll probably put up a few more videos. I'll at least put up another recap of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and maybe my Endgame review will go there first. I will have to see that. But I hope you enjoyed this episode if you listened this far. And if you'd like to get in touch, you can hit me on Instagram, popcultpod, all one word, on Twitter, at pop_cult_pod, Gmail, popcultpod@gmail.com. And if you enjoyed this, please give us a positive rating, especially if you're on iTunes, that would really help. Or subscribe so it shows up in your feed. Or just even recommend it to a friend. If you think there's someone out there that might enjoy this, I'd love to get their ears, because that is our show this week. Thank you for lending me your ears. I'm going to stop saying ears now. Anyway, I hope you come back. I hope you enjoyed it. And remember, I can't spell cult without you. Skistervilo. 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 Skistervilo.